If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Nathan Redfield. I've been a park ranger at the Boundary Waters for almost 5 years now. Before that, I was an Army Ranger for 12 years. I left the service after seeing something I couldn't explain during a mission. Something that haunts me. I thought coming to these quiet woods would help me forget. I was wrong. It all started with that sunset, blood red, the kind that makes the whole sky look like it's bleeding. I was finishing my evening patrol in my canoe, gliding across the still water. The shadows stretched long across the lake, making the trees look like bony fingers reaching out. That's when I saw it. A canoe flipped over near the shore. I paddled over fast, my heart already racing. When I got close, I saw deep gashes along the hull, not the kind you get from hitting rocks. These were deliberate, like massive claws had torn through it. There was no sign of whoever had been in that canoe. Back at the ranger station, I found out this wasn't the first time people had gone missing. Tom, the senior ranger, told me 3 separate groups of campers hadn't returned in the past month. That's not normal, even for a wilderness this big. Probably bears, Tom said, not looking up from his paperwork. Or maybe wolves. Nothing to get worked up about. But Duke didn't agree. Duke is our German shepherd, trained for search and rescue. That dog isn't afraid of anything. Bears, wolves, nothing. But lately he's been acting strange. There are parts of the forest he flat out refuses to enter. He just stops, his fur standing up, growling at empty space. I've never seen him do that before. The next day, I interviewed a camper who'd been brought in the night before. Young guy, college student. He was shaking so bad he could barely hold his coffee cup. It walked through the trees, he kept saying. Not around them, through them, like they weren't even there. I asked him what attacked his group. He just shook his head. Not an animal. Not like any animal I've ever seen. It was wrong. Part wolf maybe, but wrong. I spent the next few days checking out where the attacks happened. That's when I noticed something weird about the tracks. They would start suddenly, like whatever made them just appeared out of nowhere. Then they'd stop just as suddenly, as if the creature had vanished into thin air. At one campsite I found claw marks on the trees, all at exactly the same height, 7 feet up. They formed a perfect circle around the clearing, like it was marking territory. But no animal I know does it like that. When I showed Tom the photos, he just shrugged. Nathan, you're overthinking this. Probably just some bear with OCD. He laughed at his own joke, but I wasn't laughing. So I went to see Joseph Kingbird, an Ojibwe elder who's lived here his whole life. His cabin sits on the edge of the protected area, and he knows these woods better than anyone. Joseph listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. The old stories talk about this, he said. A spirit that walks between worlds. It comes when the moon grows bright, hunts for a season, then disappears for many years. He looked me straight in the eye. My grandfather saw it, called it the one who passes through solid things. I've never been superstitious, but something about Joseph's calm certainty sent a chill down my spine. So what do? I asked. Be careful when the moon is full, he said. And whatever you do, don't go looking for it at night. Of course, that's exactly what I was planning to do. Against Tom's direct orders, I packed my gear and headed out to camp at the site of the most recent disappearance. What I saw that night changed everything I thought I knew about the world, but as the sun went down and darkness filled the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. And somewhere in the distance, I heard trees breaking, as if something invisible was moving through the forest, coming my way. I sat very still in my tent, listening to the sounds of the forest. The normal chirps and rustles had gone quiet. That's never a good sign. Then I heard it, the crack of wood breaking, not the snap of a twig under someone's foot, but the deep, heavy sound of a whole tree being damaged. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. Nothing was there. The woods looked empty, but another crack came from about 50 yards ahead. I pointed my light and saw a young pine tree suddenly bend and split right down the middle, like something big had pushed through it. But there was nothing there. My hand shook as I reached for my radio. This wasn't a bear or a wolf. This was something else. The next morning, I hiked back to the ranger station and started digging through the old records. In a dusty box in the back room, I found a journal from 1882. The handwriting was faded, but I could make out descriptions of attacks just like the ones happening now. The writer described a creature that appeared for exactly 3 months, then vanished without a trace. The attacks stopped as suddenly as they had started. As I was reading, someone knocked on the door. It was a woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She wore hiking boots and carried scientific equipment. "Ranger Redfield? I'm Dr. Abigail Foster, wildlife researcher. Your supervisor called me in to help figure out what's attacking people." I was surprised Tom had taken it seriously enough to call in an expert, but I was glad for the help. I showed Dr. Foster everything I'd found so far. "These aren't normal predator patterns," she agreed after looking at my photos of the tracks and claw marks. "I'd like to set up some motion sensor cameras at the attack sites." We spent the next few days placing cameras throughout the forest. Dr. Foster was smart and practical. She didn't jump to conclusions, but took careful notes of everything. Then came the full moon. We were checking the cameras near Beaver Lake when we both heard a splashing sound. Something was moving through the water toward the shore. We crouched behind some bushes and watched. At first I thought it was just ripples from the wind. Then I saw it emerge from the water. It was wolf-like, but much bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen. Easily the size of a bear, but parts of it weren't solid. Where the moonlight hit its dark fur, I could see through it like it was made of water or glass. Its back half had scales like a lizard, and its eyes glowed yellow in the darkness. "What on earth?" Dr. Foster whispered beside me. The creature stopped at the shoreline and lifted its head, sniffing the air. Then came the most terrifying part. It walked straight toward a large boulder and passed right through it, like the rock wasn't even there. But I noticed something important. When it stepped into the shadow cast by a tree, it became completely solid again. Dr. Foster's hands trembled as she changed the memory card in one of the cameras. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "It phased through solid matter." Back at the station, we reviewed the footage. The cameras had caught it perfectly, the creature shifting between being solid and partially transparent as it moved from shadow to moonlight. "It's hunting like a trained soldier," I said, watching how it moved. "See how it uses cover, checks its surroundings, doubles back to cover its trail. That's Special Forces tactics." "But what is it?" Dr. Foster asked. "No known. Animal can do this. We needed more information." Following a hunch, we drove to an abandoned hunting lodge I'd seen marked on old maps. The place was falling apart, with vines growing through broken windows. Inside, the walls were covered with yellowed newspaper clippings about missing hikers and hunters. Dr. Foster noticed something I'd missed. "Look at the dates," she said, pointing to the clippings. 1836, 1883, 1930, 1977. They're all 47 years apart. In the basement, we found something that made my skin crawl. Glass jars containing what looked like shed skin. Some pieces had scales. Others had patches of fur, like the creature was part mammal, part reptile. Dr. Foster took samples back to the field lab she'd set up. After running tests, she made an important discovery. The creature can only phase through objects when direct moonlight touches its body, she explained. That's why it becomes solid in shadows. It's the moonlight that gives it power. Neither of us said it out loud, but we were both thinking the same thing. This wasn't scientific. This was something else, something that shouldn't exist in our world. We didn't know it then, but things were about to get much worse. A group of trophy hunters had arrived in the park, ignoring the warnings about dangerous predators. They were setting up bait stations, determined to catch what they thought was just an unusually aggressive wolf. They had no idea what they were really hunting, or rather, what was hunting them. I tried to warn those hunters. I really did. I showed them the photos, told them about the tracks, even mentioned the journal from 1882. They just laughed. "Listen, Ranger Rick," their leader said, slapping my shoulder. "We've hunted everything from Alaska to Zimbabwe. Whatever's out there is just an animal, and we're going to mount its head on a wall." They set up their camp near Moose Creek, right in the middle of where most attacks had happened. 5 men with expensive gear and big rifles. They put out bait stations with raw meat and blood trails leading back to their camp. They wanted to draw it in. They got their wish. We heard the screams just after midnight. Dr. Foster and I were at the ranger station going over her test results. We grabbed our gear and drove as fast as we could toward their camp. By the time we got there, it was too late. The camp was torn apart, tents shredded, gear scattered everywhere, and blood. So much blood. 4 of the hunters were dead. The 5th was alive, but in shock. He sat against a tree, staring at nothing, his expensive hunting jacket soaked red. "It walked through the bullets," he kept saying. "We shot it and the bullets just went through it like it wasn't there." He described how the Meyer Stalker, that's what I'd started calling it after the name in the old journal, had attacked during a cloud passing over the moon. When the moonlight returned, the creature became partially transparent again. It had torn through his friends with horrible efficiency. "It didn't eat them, not really," the hunter whispered. "It just took parts, like it was selecting things, hearts, livers, like it knew exactly what it wanted." After we got the survivor to the hospital, Dr. Foster and I started working on a plan. If the creature's phasing ability was connected to moonlight, maybe we could use that against it. "Ultraviolet light has similar properties to moonlight," Dr. Foster said. "We could set up UV lamps to control where it can and can't phase." We spent the next day building what looked like elaborate light traps, using equipment borrowed from the Park Service and Dr. Foster's research gear. While gathering water samples near where we thought the creature might have a den, Dr. Foster made another discovery. The water contained strange parasites, microscopic organisms that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states under her microscope. "I've never seen anything like this," she said, her eyes wide as she looked up from the microscope. "These organisms can exist in multiple phases of matter. It's like they're not fully here." We were still processing this when the radio crackled. The creature had attacked the ranger station. It came during a thunderstorm when clouds kept covering and uncovering the moon. Tom and 2 junior rangers had been inside. By the time we got there, the 2 younger rangers were dead. The creature had phased partially through their bodies, becoming solid while still inside them. I'll never forget what that looked like. Tom was alive, hiding in a supply closet. He was finally convinced this wasn't just a bear or wolf. "I saw it, Nathan," he said, his face pale and sweaty. "During the lightning flashes, it became completely solid, couldn't go through the wall. That's why it didn't get me." This was important information. Electrical disruption seemed to affect its abilities. We added this to what we knew. Moonlight. Let it phase through solid objects. Shadows made it solid, and electricity might interfere with its phasing. Dr. Foster suggested we look into the creature's history. If it appeared every 47 years, there had to be a reason. We traced the earliest newspaper reports back to the 1830s. That's when we found records of a meteorite that had crashed in the area in 1836. The first sightings began shortly after. We were getting closer to answers when tragedy struck. Dr. Foster was collecting samples near the lake when the creature attacked. I heard her scream and ran to help. I found her bleeding badly from deep cuts across her back. The creature had phased right through her protective clothing to get to her skin. I fired my rifle at it, more to scare it off than actually hurt it. It disappeared into the trees, moving like smoke between the trunks. Dr. Foster's wounds were serious, but not fatal. As I bandaged her up, I noticed something strange in the cuts. Tiny, wriggling things, like the parasites we'd seen in the water samples. Within hours, she developed a high fever. And then something even more frightening happened. Parts of her body, just her right hand at first, began to become transparent. Like she was starting to phase, the same way the creature did. "It's the parasites," she said weakly from her cot in the medical room. "They're changing me somehow." Her condition got worse quickly. The phasing spread up her arm. Sometimes her hand would pass right through solid objects. She said she could feel the creature now, sense where it was, like they were connected somehow. As the full moon approached its brightest point, we knew the creature would be at its most dangerous. It could now phase through nearly anything. Earth, water, walls, nothing could stop it. We needed to find a way to make it solid, vulnerable. And we needed to do it fast, before Dr. Foster's condition got any worse, or before she became something like the creature herself. With Dr. Foster getting worse by the hour, I knew I had to do something fast. That's when Joseph Kingbird, the Ojibwe elder, showed up at the ranger station with something wrapped in old leather. "I heard what happened," he said, his face grim. "I brought this. It belonged to my grandfather." He unwrapped the leather to reveal a knife, unlike any I'd seen before. The blade was dark gray, with strange patterns swirling through the metal. "It's made from the sky rock that fell long ago," Joseph explained. "The same rock that brought the spirit walker. My grandfather said it can harm creatures not fully in our world." I took the knife. It felt heavier than it looked and cold to the touch. "How did your grandfather know?" I asked. Joseph's eyes were sad. "Because this has happened before, every 47 years like clockwork. The spirit comes, hunts, then disappears. When the moon cycle ends. My grandfather wounded one during the last cycle." Back inside, Tom was on the radio ordering a full evacuation of the park. Reports were coming in of multiple sightings. Campers were being attacked miles apart. Almost. "At the same time, either this thing moves faster than we thought," Tom said, "or there's more than one." I sat by Dr. Foster's bed. Her condition was getting worse. Almost her entire right arm could now phase through solid objects, and the effect was spreading to her shoulder. "I can feel it, Nathan," she whispered. "The creature, it's like I'm connected to it somehow. I know where it is." She told me something disturbing. The creature wasn't choosing its victims randomly. It was targeting people with specific blood types. "It's looking for something in our blood," she said. "Something it needs." Outside, the moon was rising, full and bright. Dr. Foster could barely stay conscious, but she managed to tell me one more thing. It's strongest in moonlight, but it needs darkness to regenerate. That's why it has a den somewhere deep underground. I had an idea. Using equipment from around the station, I built a makeshift Faraday cage, a metal mesh structure that blocks electromagnetic fields. If electrical disruption affected the creature's phasing ability, this might create a safe space where it couldn't enter. I moved Dr. Foster inside the cage, along with Tom and the basic medical supplies we had. Then I prepared to do the most dangerous thing I'd ever done, hunt the creature. "I'll be bait," I told Tom. "When the creature follows me, I'll lead it somewhere it can't phase." Before I left, Dr. Foster grabbed my hand. "Underground," she said, weakly. "Take it underground where no moonlight can reach." With the meteorite knife at my belt and my rifle loaded, I headed out into the night. I knew the creature would come for me, and it did. I felt it before I saw it, a cold presence moving through the trees. Then I caught glimpses as it phased, in and out of solidity, moonlight making parts of it transparent, like looking at a wolf through clear water. Its yellow eyes fixed on me with terrible intelligence. I fired a shot in the air and ran. Not away from it, but toward the old mine shaft I'd scouted earlier, a relic from a failed copper mining operation in the 1920s. The shaft led deep underground, where no moonlight could penetrate. The creature followed, exactly as I'd hoped. I could hear it moving behind me, sometimes through the trees, sometimes right through the ground itself. I reached the mine entrance and plunged in, switching on my headlamp. The tunnel sloped steeply downward. I moved as fast as I dared on the slippery rocks. Behind me, I heard the creature enter the mine. This deep, with no moonlight, it would be fully solid, vulnerable, but also more dangerous in a fight. I went deeper, the air getting colder and damper. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber with old mining equipment scattered around. This is where I'd make my stand. When the creature entered the chamber, I saw it clearly for the first time. In the beam of my headlamp, it was fully solid, a massive wolf-like body with a lizard's scaled tail and back legs. Its front was pure predator, with claws longer than my fingers and teeth that looked like they could bite through steel. It growled, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere else, not just its throat. I raised my rifle and fired 3 shots. This time they didn't pass through. They hit, and the creature howled in pain. But it didn't go down. It lunged at me faster than anything that size should move. I dodged, but its claws caught my leg, tearing through my pants and into my calf. The pain was instant and burning. I pulled out the meteorite knife and slashed as the creature came at me again. The blade cut deep into its shoulder, and the wound leaked a strange blue fluid that glowed in the darkness. The fluid hissed when it hit the ground, burning like acid. Where it touched the rocks, reality seemed to warp and bend, like looking through warped glass. The creature backed away, wounded but still deadly. It was smart. It circled around, trying to get behind me. I kept my back to the wall and waited. When it charged again, I was ready. I ducked under its leap and drove the knife up into its belly. More of the glowing blue fluid poured out, some of it splashing onto my arms. It burned like fire, but I held on, twisting the knife deeper. The creature thrashed and clawed, ripping into my shoulder and side. The pain was blinding, but I didn't let go. I had to end this here. With one last surge of strength, I pushed the creature back toward a narrow tunnel that branched off from the main chamber. That's where I'd set my trap. Earlier, I'd placed the explosives I'd brought from the ranger station. Enough to bring down the entire tunnel. I kicked the creature into the tunnel and pulled the detonator from my pocket. As the creature recovered and lunged at me again, I hit the button. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. Rocks and dust filled the air as the tunnel collapsed, burying the creature under tons of stone and earth. The force threw me backward against the far wall of the chamber. When the dust settled, I was still alive but badly hurt. The tunnel was completely sealed off, the creature trapped inside, if it had survived. But I had a new problem. The explosion had damaged the main tunnel too. My way out was blocked by fallen rocks. I was trapped underground with no clear escape route and limited oxygen. As my headlamp flickered, I realized I might have killed the creature only to die slowly in this underground tomb. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. There had to be another way out. And as I searched the chamber more carefully, I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about this monster. As my headlamp beams swept across the chamber walls, I noticed something I'd missed before. There were markings on the stone. Not natural formations, but drawings, cave paintings. I limped closer, wincing from my wounds. The paintings were crude but clear, stick figures of humans running from a large, wolf-like creature, the same creature I'd just fought. But these paintings looked ancient, older than the mine itself. I followed the wall, studying the images. They showed the creature in different time periods. In one scene, it was attacking people in old-fashioned clothes, like from the 1800s. In another, it was facing men with spears. The paintings went back farther than seemed possible. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A drawing of the creature surrounded by smaller versions of itself, offspring. and next to it a series of moon cycles carefully marked. 47 of them. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The creature wasn't alone. It had young ones that grew underground, away from the light. Every 47 years, they emerged to hunt. The one I'd been tracking was just a parent, feeding its young. I had to get out of here, had to warn everyone. But how? The main tunnel was blocked. I searched desperately for another exit, my oxygen running low. In the far corner of the chamber, I found a narrow crevice with air flowing through it. I squeezed myself in, ignoring the pain from my wounds. The passage was tight, scraping my shoulders as I crawled forward. Several times I thought I'd get stuck, but I kept going. After what felt like hours, the passage widened slightly. I could see a faint light ahead. With my last strength, I pushed forward and emerged into a small natural cave with a hole in the ceiling. Daylight streamed through. Using roots and rocks as handholds, I climbed out. I was on the far side of the ridge, almost a mile from where I'd entered the mine. My radio was broken and I was losing blood. I stumbled through the forest, heading back toward the ranger station. When I finally made it back, the place was deserted, except for Tom and Dr. Foster in the Faraday cage I'd built. Foster looked terrible. The phasing had spread to most of her. Right side now. But she was conscious, and her eyes widened when she saw me. "You're alive," she whispered. I felt it die, the big one. "But there are more, aren't there?" I nodded, collapsing into a chair as Tom bandaged my wounds. "Young ones, growing underground. The cave paintings showed them. Every 47 years they come out to feed." "We need to tell someone," Tom said. "Call. In the National Guard, the Army, somebody. But who would believe us? A creature that could walk through solid matter when touched by moonlight. Young ones growing in caves deep underground. We sounded crazy, even to ourselves. Still, we had to try. Once my wounds were stable enough to travel, we drove to the regional headquarters. We brought all our evidence, photos, videos, samples. Of the blue fluid, Dr. Foster's medical readings. They listened politely. Then they diagnosed us with radiation poisoning from geological samples we must have handled improperly. That would explain our wounds, our stories, everything. They simply couldn't or wouldn't believe the truth. Dr. Foster's condition stabilized, but didn't improve. The doctors couldn't explain what was happening to her, so they classified it as an unknown autoimmune disorder. She could now control her phasing somewhat, keeping it hidden from the medical staff. "I can feel them, Nathan," she told me in the hospital. "The young ones. They're still down there, still growing." 3 months passed. Fall turned to winter, and the full moon came and went. And just as the historical records predicted, all signs of the creatures stopped. No more attacks, no more sightings. It was as if they had never existed. Dr. Foster and I were both released from medical care but kept under observation. Her phasing ability didn't go away, but she learned to live with it. Sometimes I'd watch her absent-mindedly pass her fingers through solid objects when she thought no one was looking. I took early retirement and built a cabin far from popular hiking trails, but still within the park boundaries. I needed to be close, to keep watch. I installed solar panels, a small lab with equipment Dr. Foster helped me get, and a reinforced basement with a Faraday cage built in. Dr. Foster visits sometimes. We don't talk much about what happened. Instead, we plan. We track lunar cycles, monitor missing persons reports, and keep a special calendar marked with the next 47-year date. I keep Joseph Kingbird's meteorite knife in a locked box by my bed. Sometimes, on clear nights when the moon is full, I hear sounds in the forest that shouldn't be there, and I wonder if all the young ones died when the tunnel collapsed, or if some survived, growing stronger in the darkness, waiting for their time. Most nights, I wake up in a cold sweat, remembering yellow eyes watching me through the trees, remembering how it felt to have claws that shouldn't exist in our world tearing into my flesh. Dr. Foster says we should write everything down, create a record for whoever comes after us. Because even if we're not around when the 47 years are up, someone needs to be ready. Someone needs to know what waits in the shadows when the moon is bright, so that's why I'm telling this story. That's why I've recorded everything that happened in the Boundary Waters in the summer of 1977. If you're reading this, well, check the date, count 47 years. And if your time is coming, prepare yourself, because they're real. The Maya stalkers are real, and they'll come again. Watch the trees on moonlit nights, and if you see shadows moving in impossible ways, run, run far and fast. But know this, you can't outrun what can move through solid matter. You can only hope to survive until the hunting season ends, and pray that next time someone finishes what I started. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm 44 years old, and I work as a park ranger at Shawnee National Forest in Illinois. I came to this quiet place 3 years ago after my wife Sarah disappeared without a trace. The doctors called it running away from grief, but I just needed space to breathe without seeing her everywhere I looked. I live in a small wooden cabin near the edge of my patrol area. It's simple, but has everything I need: a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, and a wide porch where I drink coffee each morning with Cooper, my German Shepherd. Cooper was Sarah's dog first, and now he's all I have left of her. This morning started like any other. I woke up at sunrise, put on my uniform, and stepped onto the porch with my coffee. That's when I saw them. Strange symbols carved into the wooden boards of my porch. Perfect circles with complicated patterns inside them, like snowflakes made of straight lines. I knelt down to touch them. The cuts were fresh, made sometime during the night while I slept just a few feet away. Cooper sniffed at them and backed away whining. "What is it, boy?" I asked, but he just stared at the symbols and refused to step near them. As I looked around, I noticed something else strange. The forest was completely silent. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Nothing. Just heavy, thick silence pressing in from all sides. In my 15 years as a ranger, I'd never heard the woods this quiet. Not even during winter storms. Something was wrong. I grabbed my radio and gear and headed out to check the camping areas. The first 2 sites were empty, normal for a Tuesday in late September. But the third site, Eagle Point, stopped me cold. Family-sized tents stood open. Camping chairs circled a dead fire pit. Coolers full of food sat on the picnic table. But there was no one around. "Hello?" I called out. "Park ranger, anyone here?" Nothing. Just that eerie silence. I checked the tent and found 4 sleeping bags neatly laid out, backpacks with clothes still inside, a little girl's stuffed rabbit, and in the corner, a family-sized duffel bag with toothbrushes and soap, all the bathroom. Stuff you'd never leave behind. This wasn't someone taking a hike. They'd left everything. Next to one of the sleeping bags, I found a camera, one of those digital ones that lets you see the pictures right away. I turned it on and scrolled through. Images of a happy family, mom, dad, teenage boy, and a girl around 10 years old. Smiling at Garden of the Gods rock formations, roasting marshmallows, normal vacation stuff. Then I saw it in the background of a selfie the family had taken. Standing between 2 distant trees was a tall, blurry figure, too tall to be a person. I flipped to the next picture, taken moments later judging by the light. The figure was closer now, though still blurry. In the last few images, it seemed to be getting closer each time, but always blurry, like the camera couldn't quite focus on it. The last picture made my skin crawl. It showed their empty campsite, this exact campsite, taken from the edge of the trees, as if someone had used their camera after they were gone. And then I saw the symbols again. the same circles with geometric patterns inside, carved into a nearby tree. Cooper, who had been sniffing around the site, suddenly stopped. His fur stood up along his back, and he growled at the empty space between two trees. I looked but saw nothing. "What is it, boy?" I asked again, but he just kept growling, refusing to move forward. I called the missing family into the station and spent the rest of the day searching the nearby trails. No sign of them anywhere, no footprints leading away from camp. Nothing. When I got back to my cabin that evening, there was a woman waiting on my porch. She was in her 30s with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, wearing hiking boots and carrying a heavy backpack. "Ranger Reed?" she asked, standing up. "I'm Eliza Donovan. I'm a historian collecting local folklore. Your office said I might find you here." I shook her hand and let her inside, glad for the company after the strange day. "I'm documenting stories. And from this region," she explained as I made coffee, "particularly ones about a figure the locals call the Empty Man." "Never heard of it," I said, putting a mug in front of her. "Most rangers haven't," she smiled. "It's not the kind of thing that makes it into official park literature. The Empty Man is said to be a creature that steals faces and identities. The Shawnee believed it could take the form of people who went missing in these woods." I thought about the missing family and felt a chill run down my spine. "There's a family. Missing," I told her. "Disappeared without taking any of their things." Her face went serious. "Were there any markings? Symbols?" "How did you know?" I asked. Before she could answer, the radio on my belt crackled to life. It was my boss telling me Sheriff Colton was on his way with deputies to investigate the missing family. I thanked Eliza for the information and headed back to the campsite with Cooper to meet the sheriff. Before leaving, I grabbed the camera to show him the strange photos. As I was locking my cabin door, Cooper started barking wildly at the tree line. I looked up, and for just a second, so brief I almost thought I imagined it, I saw a figure standing there, tall and thin, just watching us. But its face, it had no features at all. Just smooth, blank skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. I blinked, and it was gone. When I got back to the campsite to meet Sheriff Colton, I found something I'd missed earlier. Tucked inside the little girl's sleeping bag was a drawing, done in crayon. It showed her family holding hands, and behind them a tall figure with no face. I looked up at the silent forest around us, feeling watched from all sides, and wondered what happened to that little girl and her family, and if my wife's disappearance 3 years ago might somehow be connected to whatever was happening now. Sheriff Colton wasn't happy when he arrived. He was a big man with a thick mustache and tired eyes. He'd brought 3 deputies with him, and they all looked worried. 2 other families have gone missing this month, he told me, while we walked around the campsite. No trace, just like this one. All their stuff left behind. I showed him the strange symbols and the photos from the camera. He frowned at the blurry figure in the background. Could be anything, he said. Probably just a smudge on the lens, but I could tell he didn't believe that. Something about the way his eyes kept darting to the tree line gave him away. "I know someone who might help," I said. "Daniel Rivers. He's an elder from the Shawnee tribe who lives just outside the park." The next morning, I drove to Daniel's small house near the edge of the forest. He was in his 70s, with long grey hair tied back in a ponytail. His hands were rough from years of working with wood. He made beautiful carvings that tourists loved to buy. When I showed him the drawings of the symbols, his face went pale. "Where did you find these?" he asked quietly. "On my porch." "And near where a family went missing?" Daniel touched the paper gently, tracing the patterns with his finger. "These are boundaries," he said. "Warnings and containers. Our people have known about them for centuries." He invited me inside and showed me an old leather-bound book. Inside were drawings of the same symbols, along with pictures of a tall, faceless figure. "We call it the Stealer of Faces," Daniel explained. "It comes in cycles every 27 years, takes people, becomes them." "Becomes them?" I asked. It needs identities, memories, faces, to understand us, to be like us. He looked out his window toward the forest. Last time was 27 years ago. 6 people vanished near Bald Knob Cross. I felt a chill run down my spine. My wife disappeared 3 years ago. In these woods, Daniel looked at me with sad eyes. The cycle is beginning early this time. That's not good. I called Sheriff Colton and told him what I'd learned. He was skeptical, but agreed to meet us at the station to look through old records. The records room was dusty and smelled like old paper, but what we found made my blood run cold. Every 27 years, like clockwork, people had gone missing in these woods, dating all the way back to 1830. This is crazy, Sheriff Colton said, but he couldn't explain it away. The next day, we organized a search team to check the Garden of the Gods area where the family had taken their photos. Me, Sheriff Colton, his 3 deputies, Daniel and Eliza. Even Cooper came along to help track. The weather turned bad as we reached the rock formations. Thick fog rolled in, making it hard to see more than 10 feet ahead. We split into pairs to cover more ground. Was with Deputy Wilson, a young guy who'd only been on the force for a year. We were checking a narrow path between 2 tall rocks when Wilson said he heard something. "Wait here," he told me. "I'll check around this bend." He disappeared into the fog. 5 seconds later, I heard his radio crackle, then silence. "Wilson." I called. No answer. I hurried forward, turning the corner. Nothing, just empty path. "Wilson!" I shouted. The others came running. We found Wilson's radio on the ground. Next to it was his gun. But there were no footprints leading away, even though the ground was soft from the fog. He had simply vanished. We searched for hours. But as darkness fell, Sheriff Colton called it off until morning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., Cooper started barking like crazy at the window. I grabbed my flashlight and looked out. There, at the edge of the trees, stood Deputy Wilson. My heart leapt. He was alive. I rushed to the door and called his name. He turned slowly toward me. That's when my blood froze. His face was completely smooth. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank skin stretched over a head-shaped form. But then he spoke, somehow. Wilson's voice, perfectly normal, coming from nowhere. "Come see," it said. "Come see what I found, Ranger. Read." Cooper was going wild, barking and growling. The thing that looked like Wilson stood perfectly still, waiting. "What are you?" I called out, my voice shaking. "I'm learning," it said with Wilson's voice. "Come teach me more." Then it backed away into the mist that seemed to form around it and was gone. The next morning, I told Sheriff Colton what I'd seen. He didn't want to believe me, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "We need to find where they're being taken," he said finally. Daniel suggested we search the oldest part of the forest, where the trees were so thick sunlight barely reached the ground. That's where we found the cave. It was hidden behind a wall of vines, the entrance barely big enough to crawl through. Sheriff Colton went first, then me, then Eliza. The other deputies stayed outside with Daniel. Our flashlights revealed a tunnel that opened into a large cavern. What we saw inside made my skin crawl. Hanging from the ceiling and lined up on rock shelves were personal items. Watches, wallets, wedding rings, backpacks. Some looked new. Others were so old they were falling apart. But the walls were the worst part. They were covered with what looked like faces pressed into the stone. Hundreds of them, men, women, children, all frozen in looks of terror. So detailed, I could see eyelashes and wrinkles. "What the hell?" Sheriff Colton whispered. Eliza was taking pictures, her face pale. "These items go back decades," she said, examining an old pocket watch. "This one's from 1938. Then we found a small purse that made my heart stop. Pink with a butterfly clasp. I'd given it to Sarah on our 10th anniversary. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Inside was her driver's license, her pink lipstick, and the small silver locket with our wedding photo. "It has her," I whispered. "It took my Sarah." As we backed out of the cave, shaken by what we'd found, Eliza explained what her research had uncovered. The Hollow One feeds on identity and memory, she said. It watches people, learns them, then takes their form. Each time it gets better at being human. We set up cameras throughout the forest that night. By morning, most had stopped working, but one caught something that made even Sheriff Colton believe. The footage showed a tall, thin figure standing perfectly still between trees. Then, its arms stretched, actually stretched like rubber, reaching out 20 feet to touch a nearby trunk. Its legs grew longer, raising it up like a spider. Then it seemed to dissolve into mist. I was looking at the video for the 10th time when I heard a sound from my kitchen, a chair scraping across the floor. Cooper, who had been lying at my feet, suddenly stood up, tail wagging furiously. He ran into the kitchen. I followed, heart pounding. Sitting at my table was Sarah, my wife. Her face was strange, like clay that was still being shaped, features forming and melting and reforming as I watched. "Hello, Marcus," she said in Sarah's voice. "I've missed you." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Sarah sat at my kitchen table, but her face wasn't quite right. It kept shifting slightly, like someone was molding clay from inside her head. Cooper wasn't afraid, though. He wagged his tail and put his head in her lap like he used to do. She, or the thing that looked like her, stroked his fur with perfect familiarity. "You're not real," I finally managed to say. "You're not Sarah." She smiled, and the movement looked practiced, like someone copying a smile they'd seen. "I am and I'm not," she said. "I have her memories. I know that you proposed at sunset on Lake Michigan, that you were so nervous you dropped the ring in the sand, that we laughed about it for years." My throat went dry. No one knew that story except Sarah and me. "How?" I began. "I became part of something greater," she said, her voice exactly like my wife's. "I can show you too, Marcus. We can be together again." She reached across the table for my hand. I jerked back, knocking over my chair. "What are you?" I demanded. "Something old, something that's been alone too long." Her eyes watched me with Sarah's gentle expression. "Don't you want her back? I can be her for you." "Perfectly," Cooper whined, confused by my reaction. To him, this was his owner returned. "Where is she?" I asked. "The real Sarah." The smile faded. "She's here." She tapped her temple. "Part of me now, along with many others." My phone rang, making me jump. It was Sheriff Colton. "Reed, get down to the station." "Now. Bring your dog and whatever weapons you have. Don't talk to anyone on the way." I glanced at the thing wearing my wife's face. "I have a situation here." "What kind of situation?" Colton asked. The Sarah thing smiled again. "Tell him I said hello." I heard Colton's sharp intake of breath through the phone. "Is that?" "Yes," I said. "My wife is sitting at my kitchen table." "That's not your wife," he said firmly. "Get out of there, now." I backed toward the door, calling Cooper. He hesitated, looking between me and Sarah. "Come, boy," I said more urgently. "Stay, Cooper," said the thing with Sarah's voice. To my horror, the dog obeyed her command. I ran for the door and out to my truck. As I drove away, I looked back to see her standing on my porch, waving goodbye with Sarah's familiar gesture. At the station, I found Sheriff Colton with his 2 remaining deputies, along with Eliza and Daniel. They had guns, maps, and worried faces. "It's getting bolder," Colton said. "2 of my deputies are gone now. This thing took Wilson yesterday, and Green never showed up for his shift this morning." "It came to my house looking like Sarah," I said, my voice shaking. "It knew things only she would know." Daniel nodded gravely. "It absorbs memories when it takes someone, becomes them in almost every way." "We need a way to tell who's real and who isn't," Deputy Santos said, eyeing everyone suspiciously. Eliza pulled out her notes. "From what I've found, there might be a way. The Hollow One can't cross certain materials, iron, salt, ash from blackjack oak. So we make a test," Colton decided. "Anyone could be it by now. We made a paste from the materials Eliza mentioned and drew lines across the station doorway and between desks. One by one, we stepped over them to prove we were human. All of us passed, but the fear remained. How many people in town had already been replaced? That evening, we set up camp in the station. No one wanted to go home alone. At midnight, there was a knock at the door. Green, the missing deputy, stood outside, smiling and normal-looking. "Sorry I'm late," he called through the glass. "Car trouble." Santos moved to open the door, but Sheriff Colton stopped him. "The line test," he reminded everyone. Green stepped over the threshold easily, clearing the line of iron and salt. We all relaxed a little, but something felt off about him. His movements were too smooth. He didn't blink enough. And when he smiled, it was always the exact same smile, like a photograph. Later, I caught him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Not with curiosity or suspicion, with hunger. I whispered my concerns to Colton, who had noticed it. "Two, we need to test something else," he said quietly. "Iron affects it, right?" He pretended to accidentally drop his keys near Green. "Can you grab those for me?" The keys had a rusty iron ring holding them together. Green picked them up with his bare hands. No reaction. "Seems fine," Colton muttered to me. "Maybe we're just jumpy." But that night, I woke to see Green standing over Santos's sleeping form, looking down with that too perfect smile. His fingers stretched, actually stretched like rubber, reaching for the sleeping deputy's face. I shouted a warning and lunged for my gun. Green's head snapped toward me, and for just a second, his face went completely smooth before reforming. Colton fired first, hitting Green in the shoulder. But instead of blood, black goo poured out of the wound. His arm melted, dripping onto the floor in thick globs that began to move on their own. The rest of Green's body lunged for the door, smashing through it before any of us could fire again. "How did it pass the test?" Santos asked, shaking. Daniel looked grim. "It's getting stronger. Learning to overcome our defenses." In the morning, Eliza discovered something important about the 27-year cycle. It matched a rare fungal bloom that appeared in the deepest parts of the forest. "The locals call it ghost breath," she explained, showing us pictures of pale, misty growth on tree trunks. "It only grows in 3 places in North America." This gave me an idea. I drove back to my old house, the one Sarah and I had shared before she disappeared. I hadn't been there in 3 years, but I still had the key. Everything was dusty and exactly as I'd left it. I went to Sarah's office and started searching through her things. My wife had been a biologist specializing in unusual fungi. Had she discovered something about the ghost breath before she vanished? In a hidden compartment in her desk, I found a small journal I'd never seen before. The first entry was dated just 2 weeks before she disappeared. "Found unusual growth patterns in Shawnee samples," she'd written. "Spores contain unknown compounds that affect brain activity in lab mice. They seem to experience hallucinations of being watched." The final entry made my blood run cold. "Something is watching me from the trees. I see it when I take photos, but never with my naked eye. Coming back tomorrow with special equipment to capture better images." She never came home from that trip. As I drove back to the station, I realized something terrible. This thing hadn't just started appearing 3 years ago. It had been watching us, learning about us, preparing to take Sarah first. And now, 3 years later, it had learned enough to create a perfect copy of her. But why wait 3 years to show itself to me? What was it planning? When I got back to the station, I found chaos. During the few hours I was gone, both Santos and Eliza had disappeared while checking the forest. Cameras. Colton was loading shotguns, his face grim. "We found this," he said, handing me a camera. The screen showed dozens of copies of Deputy Green standing among the trees, and behind them, taller than the rest, was a copy of me. My hands shook as I stared at the photo. There I was, or something that looked exactly like me, standing tall among the trees, watching the camera with my own eyes. "How is this possible?" I asked. "I've been with you or at my old house all day." Sheriff Colton looked as scared as I felt. "It's making copies now, not just replacing people." We were down to just the two of us, plus Daniel, who had stayed behind. At the station, everyone else was either missing or something else now. "What's it planning?" I wondered aloud. Daniel studied my wife's journal carefully. "According to this, the fungus your wife found might be how it connects to our world. Like a doorway." "So we destroy the fungus?" Colton asked hopefully. Daniel shook his head. "Not that simple. The fungus is just a symptom. This entity has been here long before us. It's building towards something." "What?" "A permanent form," Daniel said. "Your wife's notes suggest it's been trying to create a stable physical body that doesn't need to copy others. One that can exist in our world without melting away." Night was falling, and none of us wanted to be outside after dark. We barricaded the station doors and windows, drawing lines of salt and iron at every entrance. Around midnight, I saw headlights pull up outside. Multiple vehicles. Colton peered through the blinds. "It's Santos and Green, and... oh God." I looked. Out, standing by the cars, were copies of Santos, Green, Eliza, Wilson, and me. 5 of me, all identical, all wearing my ranger uniform. They just stood there, watching the station, not moving. "They want in," Colton whispered. An hour passed, then 2. The copies didn't leave, they didn't get tired, they just watched. Then, one of the me copies walked forward, stopping just before the salt line at the door. "Marcus!" it called in my voice. "We need to talk." "Don't answer," Daniel warned. "It's trying to learn your speech patterns," but Colton had other ideas. "Maybe we can learn something, find out what it wants." Before I could stop him, he cracked the door open, staying behind the salt line. "What do you want?" he called out. The me copy smiled my smile. "To be complete, to understand." "Understand what?" Colton asked. "Being human, we've been watching for so long, learning, but some things we can't learn by watching." "Like what?" I couldn't help asking. All 5 of my copies turned their heads to look at me in perfect unison. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. Pain, loss, hope, love. "We see them, but we don't feel them," my voice answered from 5 mouths. "Your wife helped us understand love. Now you'll help us understand the rest." A chill ran down my spine. "What did you do to Sarah?" "Made her part of something greater. She's still here." The copy tapped its temple. "She thinks of you often." Rage boiled up inside me. I grabbed Colton's shotgun and fired through the door. The copy's chest exploded into black goo, but its face kept smiling. Slowly the wound closed up, the black substance flowing back together. "That was pain," it said, still smiling. Interesting. The rest of the night was a nightmare. The copies tried every way possible to get into the station. They broke windows, but couldn't cross the salt lines. They cut the power. They called out in the voices of our friends and family, begging for help. As dawn approached, they finally left, disappearing into the forest mist. "We need to end this," Colton said, loading his guns, "before there are more copies." Daniel had been quiet all night, reading Sarah's journal and making notes of his own. "I think I know where they're going," he said finally. "There's an old burial mound at the center of the forest, sacred ground to my people. According to your wife's research, it's where the fungus first appears in each cycle." "So that's where this thing lives?" I asked. "Not lives. Forms. Becomes." Daniel looked grim. "I believe the copies are gathering there, building towards something. We packed everything we might need, guns, salt, iron filings, flashlights. As we were about to leave, Colton's radio crackled to life. "Sheriff!" It was Santos's voice. "Sheriff, I got away from them. I'm hiding in the old ranger station. Please help." Colton looked at me. "Could be a trap." "Definitely a trap," I agreed. "But what if it's really him? Colton asked. We argued about it, but in the end, Colton couldn't abandon his deputy on just a suspicion. We agreed he would check the ranger station while Daniel and I went to the burial mound. Before we separated, I gave Colton a packet of iron filings. Test him before you get close. We parted ways at the forest edge, Colton heading north while Daniel and I went east toward the heart of the woods. The day was misty again, the trees looming dark around us. Neither of us talked much, too busy watching for kopjes or other dangers. After 3 hours of hiking, we found the burial mound. It wasn't very impressive, just a round hill about 15 feet tall, covered in grass and small trees. But the area around it felt wrong. The air was thick and hard to breathe. Strange mushrooms grew everywhere, releasing puffs of spores when we got near. We should wait until dark, Daniel whispered. That's when they'll gather. We found a hiding spot in some thick bushes about 50 yards from the mound and settled in to wait. As the sun set, they began to arrive. First came the green kopjes, then Santos, Eliza, Wilson, then the kopjes of me, now at least 10 of them. They walked silently, forming a circle around the mound. Then came the ones that made my heart stop. 3 perfect kopjes of Sarah, wearing different clothes but with the same face. My God, I whispered. How many are there? Daniel shook his head, eyes wide. Dozens, maybe more. Then we saw Sheriff Colton stumbling through the trees, being pushed along by what looked like Santos, except Santos's face kept shifting, features melting and reforming. They'd caught Colton. The trap had worked. We have to help him, I said, reaching for my gun. Daniel grabbed my arm. Wait, watch. The kopjes stood perfectly still around the mound. Then all at once, they began to change. Their bodies started to melt, skin becoming like wax, limbs stretching and twisting. They were merging together, forming a huge mass of shifting faces and limbs that crawled up the mound like a giant amoeba. Could see faces I recognized appearing and disappearing in the mass. Green, Wilson, Eliza, Sarah, all conscious, all looking out with aware, terrified eyes. At the center of the mass was a pulsing darkness, like a heart made of shadow. That's its core, Daniel whispered. The original entity. I watched in horror as Colton was dragged toward the mass. A tendril reached out, touching his face. He screamed as his features began to melt. Now, Daniel said. We have to act now, before it's fully formed. He pulled out small bags of herbs and began a chant in his native language, his voice low but powerful. I grabbed the iron filings, salt and ash we'd brought, and began to make a circle around the mound, staying hidden in the underbrush. As Daniel's chant grew louder, the mass on the mound began to writhe and shift faster. Faces emerged from it, screaming silently, then sank back in. Among them, I saw Sarah's face. Her eyes met mine, and I swear she recognized me. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but I could read them. Set us free. I finished the circle of salt, iron, and ash around the mound, just as the mass of bodies began to change again. It started to separate, splitting into dozens of faceless figures that stood up on 2 long legs. They all turned toward Daniel, who was still chanting, his voice getting stronger. They know what we're doing, I shouted. The faceless figures moved with impossible speed, rushing toward Daniel. I fired my shotgun, hitting the closest one. It burst into black goo, but kept coming, reforming as it moved. Daniel didn't stop chanting. The bag of herbs in his hands began to smoke, filling the air with a sweet smell that made the creatures hesitate. I fired again and again, trying to buy him time to finish the ritual. But there were too many of them. One reached Daniel, its arms stretching like rubber to grab him by the throat. I ran forward, swinging an iron rod through the creature's arm. It cut through like a knife through butter, the severed part dissolving into mist. The creature shrieked, a sound like wind through broken glass, but now the others were coming for me. I backed away, still firing, still swinging the iron rod. For every one I hit, two more appeared. I tripped over a root and fell hard. The closest creature loomed over me, its blank face starting to form features. My own. "We can be you," it said with my voice. "Better than you. Perfect." Its hand reached for my face, fingers stretching impossibly long. In that moment, something clicked in my mind. The missing family, the camping gear they left behind, my wife's research, the creatures, words about understanding human emotions. "You want to be human," I said, "but you can't take what isn't offered." The creature paused, head tilting like a curious dog. "You feed on identity," I continued, my mind racing, "on how we see ourselves, on memory." I stood up slowly, dropping my gun and the iron rod. The creatures watched, uncertain. "Take me," I said clearly, "but not by force. That's not how humans work. We give ourselves freely." The mass on the mound pulsed, the faces within it turning to look at me. Daniel had stopped chanting, watching in horror. "Marcus, no!" But I understood now. This thing couldn't truly become human by stealing identities. It had to be given them willingly. I took a step toward the mound, then another. The faceless figures parted, letting me pass. "I give you my memories," I said, "my identity, but only if you release the others." At the edge of the mound, I stopped and looked back at Daniel. "Finish the ritual when I'm inside." Before he could stop me, I stepped onto the mound. Immediately, the mass surged forward, engulfing my legs, my waist, my chest. It was cold and hot at the same time, like being surrounded by electric jelly. Faces pressed against me from all sides. Green, Santos, Wilson, the missing family. And Sarah. My Sarah. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice somehow in my head. I didn't understand what it wanted until too late. "It's okay," I told her. "I'm here now." The mass pulled me deeper, toward the pulsing shadow at its center. As I got closer, I felt my memories being pulled from my mind, my childhood, my years as a ranger, my life with Sarah. But instead of fighting, I let them go. All except one, the memory of Sarah's silver wedding ring, still on the chain around my neck. As the shadow core touched me, I reached up and grabbed the ring, yanking it free from the chain. "You want to understand humans?" I whispered to the entity. "Then understand this. We let go of what we love most." I plunged the silver ring into the heart of the shadow. The effect was instant. The entire mass convulsed, a silent scream rippling through it. The shadow core began to collapse inward, pulling everything with it like a black hole. I felt myself being dragged deeper, the faces around me stretching and distorting as they were pulled in. Then Daniel's voice cut through everything, his chanting, reaching a crescendo. The circle of salt, iron, and ash around the mound burst into blue flame. The pull stopped. The mass began to dissolve, the copies melting into mist that evaporated in the morning light that was just beginning to filter through. The trees. I found myself lying on the empty mound, covered in black residue that faded away like dew in sunlight. Around me lay the real people, Sheriff Colton, his deputies, Eliza, even the missing family, all unconscious but breathing. But not Sarah. There was no sign of her. I searched everywhere, calling her name until my voice gave out. But somehow, I knew she had been part of the entity too long. When it collapsed, she went with it. Daniel helped me get everyone back to town. They all woke up eventually, confused, and with no memory of what had happened. The official story became carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty generator, causing hallucinations and blackouts. Who would believe the truth anyway? In the days that followed, the forest came back to life. Birds returned singing in the trees. Insects buzzed in the underbrush. Even the air felt cleaner, lighter. I returned to my cabin and tried to piece my life back together. But something was missing, more than just Sarah. I realized I could no longer remember her face. When I tried to picture her, there was just A blank space where her features should be. The entity had taken that from me, my most precious memory. 6 months passed. Life in the park returned to normal. Tourists came and went. The missing family moved away. Sheriff Colton retired early, saying he'd had enough excitement for one lifetime. I stayed on as ranger, though sometimes I wondered why. Maybe I was waiting for something, though I didn't know what. Then one evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, Cooper suddenly stood up, tail wagging like crazy. He ran to the edge of the yard, barking happily at the tree line. That's when I saw it, a tall, thin figure standing perfectly still between 2 oak trees, watching my cabin, watching me. I should have been afraid, should have run inside, grabbed my gun, called for help. But I didn't feel fear, just a strange sense of recognition, like seeing an old friend. The figure raised one impossibly long arm and pointed at my porch, at the symbols still carved into the wood. I understood then. It wasn't gone, not completely, and it would come back. Maybe in another 27 years, maybe sooner. The next day, I carefully repaired my porch, covering all the symbols with new boards. All except one. The smallest circle at the corner nearest the forest, I left uncovered. A door left slightly open. An invitation. Sometimes at night I sit on my porch looking at that symbol, wondering if I made the right choice. Wondering if next time the entity might find what it's looking for. Wondering if, somewhere in whatever passes for its mind, it still holds Sarah's memories and mine. Cooper often sits with me, his head sometimes turning to look at something I can't see, standing in the yard. He never barks at it anymore. Just watches, curious but unafraid, and sometimes, when the mist rolls in from the forest, I think I see a familiar shape walking toward my cabin, a woman's shape, but I can never quite make out her face. Maybe someday. I will, maybe someday she'll come home. Until then, I wait and watch the forest, and the forest watches back. My name is Elaine Holbrook. I'm 39 years old, and I used to be an astrophysicist, someone who studies stars and space. But I left that life behind 3 years ago after I saw something strange in the night sky that none of my co-workers believed. Now I work as a park ranger in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The mountains feel safer than staring at the endless darkness above. At least, they did until recently. It started during a normal day, leading tourists through Alum Cave. I checked the lanterns twice that morning, putting in fresh batteries and filling the fuel tanks on the gas ones. But as we walked deeper into the cave, the lights seemed dimmer than they should be. I told myself it was just the dampness in the air, making the light scatter. That's when little Emma, an 8-year-old girl at the front of the group, suddenly screamed and jumped backward into her father's arms. "Something touched my hair," she cried, her eyes wide with fear. "Someone made of darkness." Her father laughed nervously. "Honey, it was probably just a drop of water from the ceiling." But Emma shook her head hard. "No, I saw it. It was like a person, but it was made of the dark parts between the lights." I shined my flashlight where she was pointing, but there was nothing there, just rock walls and ordinary shadows. I calmed everyone down and finished the tour, but Emma's words stuck with me. Made of darkness. Why would a child describe something that way? Later that afternoon, a tourist showed me photos from their cave visit. Something caught my eye. Patches of darkness in the images that didn't make sense. They had sharp edges, too perfect to be natural shadows, and they appeared in places where there shouldn't be any darkness at all. In one picture, a shadow seemed to stretch from a rock toward a child in the tour group, even though the light source should have cast that shadow in the opposite direction. "Is there something wrong with my camera?" the tourist asked. "Probably just a glitch," I said, but I didn't believe it. The next day, I went to check our trail cameras. We keep them around the park to track wildlife movements. 3 cameras along, The Appalachian Trail had stopped working. When I took out their memory cards and loaded them onto my laptop, all I found were black frames, completely dark images, despite the motion sensors being triggered multiple times. Something had moved in front of these cameras, but whatever it was had somehow swallowed all the light. Then the accident started happening. Night hikers with their flashlights suddenly dying. A couple got lost for hours when their headlamps failed simultaneously, even though they had just put in new batteries before starting their hike. A solo backpacker was found huddled in a ball at Charlie's Bunyan Overlook, his expensive solar lantern dead, mumbling about how the dark had fingers. I started looking through old records kept in the ranger station. In a box of journals from the 1920s, I found an account written by Ranger Thomas Wilkins in 1925. He described a shadow that walks that appeared after a partial solar eclipse passed over the mountains. According to his journal, hikers reported their lantern flames being stolen right off the wick without any wind. I checked astronomical records and felt my stomach drop. In 3 days, we would experience a partial solar eclipse, the first since 1925 that would cast its shadow directly over this specific region of the park. When I tried to talk to my boss, Senior Ranger Marshall Phillips, he just laughed. "Come, on Holbrook, you're too smart for ghost stories," he said while checking his schedule. "Those cameras probably just had water damage, and tourists always exaggerate. You should know that by now." But what about all the light failures? And those shadow anomalies in the photos? I pushed. "Faulty equipment and bad photography," he said without looking up. "Focus on real problems, like the bear that's been raiding campsites near Cades Cove." I knew I wouldn't get anywhere with Marshall. He was a by-the-book ranger who didn't like anything he couldn't explain with common sense. So I drove to Cherokee to meet with Daniel Walkingstick, a local folklorist who had helped the park document traditional stories about the mountain. Daniel listened carefully as I described what had been happening. Unlike Marshall, he didn't laugh or dismiss me. "There are old stories," he said slowly, "about something our elders called the Thief of Light. It was said to wake up when day and night briefly become one during an eclipse." "What exactly is it supposed to be?" I asked. "Not what, but who," Daniel corrected. "Someone who was neither dead nor alive, trapped between worlds, who learned to feed on light itself. The stories say it grows stronger in darkness and can create perfect darkness, even in daytime. My grandmother used to warn us never to trust a shadow that moves wrong. That night, I took my flashlight and went on patrol alone. I wanted to see for myself if anything unusual was happening in the forest after dark. As I walked along the trail, near Klingman's Dome, I noticed something strange. My flashlight beam seemed to bend around certain trees as if the light itself was being pulled aside. When I pointed the beam directly at one particular cluster of pines, the light curved around them, leaving them in perfect darkness, despite being in the direct path of my flashlight. I've worked in these mountains for 3 years now. I know how shadows work, how light moves, and what I was seeing wasn't natural. Something was manipulating the darkness, and whatever it was getting stronger as the eclipse drew closer. The next morning I woke up early and headed to a remote area of the park. There are caves there that most tourists never visit. I had a hunch I might find something important. Inside one of the deeper caves, my flashlight beam swept across the rocky walls, and I froze. There were paintings on the stone, old ones. They showed human figures surrounded by darkness, their shadows being pulled away from their bodies like they were being stolen. I took photos with shaking hands. Who made these? How long had they been here? The images matched exactly what was happening now. I was still in the cave when my radio crackled to life. "Ranger Holbrook, we have a situation on Laurel Falls Trail. Family of 5 lost. Respond if you can." I hurried out of the cave and drove to the trailhead. Laurel Falls is one of our easiest and most popular trails. People don't get lost there. It's wide, well-marked, and always crowded with tourists. I found the family huddled at the ranger station, wrapped in emergency blankets despite the warm day. They looked pale and confused. "It doesn't make sense," the father kept saying. "We've hiked that trail 3 times before, but there was this darkness." "What kind of darkness?" I asked quietly. The mother looked up. "Not normal shadow. It was like a hole in the day. We were walking, and suddenly there was this patch of complete blackness right in the middle of the trail. We thought maybe it was just shade from the trees. But what?" I prompted. "It moved," she whispered, "against the way the sun was shining, like it was alive." Their youngest son hadn't spoken a word since they were found. He sat staring at the floor, occasionally glancing nervously at his own shadow. Something about the way he watched it made my skin crawl. "Tyler hasn't talked since it happened," his mother said, following my gaze. "He was closest to the darkness." I walked the family back to their car, making sure they were okay to drive to their hotel. As they were getting in, I noticed something strange. When Tyler moved, his shadow seemed to lag behind by just a fraction of a second. And when he stood still, waiting for his dad to unlock the door, I could have sworn I saw his shadow's hand move slightly, as if beckoning toward the forest. That afternoon, I was organizing my notes when a black SUV pulled up to the ranger station. A man in his 50s stepped out, carrying what looked like scientific equipment. "Ranger Holbrook?" he asked, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Kenneth Murray, research physicist from University of Tennessee. I understand you've been experiencing some unusual phenomena here." "Who told you that?" I asked, surprised. He smiled. "I've had instruments in these mountains for 6 months, studying atmospheric conditions. For the past week, my readings have been impossible. Areas where light behaves abnormally. I traced the patterns and they all center here." Dr. Murray showed me his data on a tablet. There were maps of the park with red blotches where his instruments had detected what he called light anomalies. "At first, I thought my equipment was malfunctioning," he explained. "But then I got these." He pulled out a folder with photographs of the forest. In some areas, the images were distorted, not blurry, but somehow wrong, like the light had bent around certain objects. "There are places in your park where light simply isn't behaving according to the laws of physics," Dr. Murray said. "I'd like your help investigating." Over the next 2 days, Dr. Murray and I tested different areas of the park. We set up special cameras and sensors. The results were disturbing. We found spots where his equipment measured what he called missing wavelengths, certain colors of light that should be there but weren't, as if something was eating only specific types of light. During one experiment near a grove of old oak trees, we both saw it. The shadows of the trees briefly disconnected from the trunks and moved on their own for about 3 seconds before snapping back into place. "Did you?" I started. "Yes," Dr. Murray whispered. "That's not supposed to happen." That night, a thunderstorm rolled through the mountains. Dr. Murray and I were driving back to the ranger station when lightning flashed across the sky. In that brief, bright moment, we both saw a tall, human-shaped silhouette standing perfectly, still on a distant ridge. It was completely black, not a person in dark clothing, but a piece of absolute darkness cut into the shape of a person. "Stop the car!" Dr. Murray said hoarsely. Another flash of lightning. The figure was still there, unmoved. But in the seconds of darkness between flashes, I couldn't see it at all. It was as if it was only visible when surrounded by bright light. Back at the station, Dr. Murray's face was grim as he showed me readings from a device he called a photometer. "These are negative light readings," he explained. "Not just darkness, but anti-light. Areas where light is being actively consumed, creating darkness deeper than what's naturally possible." The next day, 3 different families reported the same strange story. Children claiming their shadows were whispering to them. One mother showed me a video of her daughter standing still while her shadow's arm clearly moved upward. I went back to Daniel Walking Stick with our findings and the cave paintings I'd discovered. "There's a pattern here," Daniel said, spreading out old tribal records and my photos. "Every disappearance in these mountains for the past 300 years has happened within 2 weeks of an eclipse. And look at this." He pointed to a warning written in Cherokee, then translated, "Cast no shadow when the sky joins, or the shadow will be all that returns." As the day of the eclipse grew closer, I could feel a heaviness in the air. The forest seemed quieter. Birds weren't singing as much. Even the usual summer tourists seemed subdued, speaking in hushed voices as if they sensed something wasn't right. At night, I would stare at my own shadow cast by the desk lamp, wondering if I was imagining the way it sometimes seemed to stretch toward the darkest corner of my cabin, like it was being pulled by an unseen force. Tomorrow was the eclipse. Whatever was happening had been building toward this moment for years, maybe centuries. Dr. Murray and I had a plan to document everything. From the best viewpoint in the park, Klingman's Dome Observation Tower. We didn't know what we would see, but we both knew that understanding this thing was the first step to stopping it. That night, I dreamed of a forest filled with people without shadows, their bodies slightly transparent, watching me with hungry eyes. I woke up just before dawn with my heart racing, the darkness around me feeling heavier and more alive than darkness should ever feel. The day of the eclipse arrived with a strange stillness. The air felt heavy, like right before a big storm. Dr. Murray and I got to Klingman's Dome Observation Tower early, carrying all our equipment. We set up cameras, light meters, temperature gauges, and other tools I remembered from my days studying. The stars. "The partial eclipse begins in 30 minutes, Dr. Murray said, checking his watch. "Let's run a final equipment check." Tourists were gathering on the observation deck too. Some had special glasses to watch the eclipse safely. Others were just there to enjoy the view, not knowing what might happen. I wanted to tell them all to leave, to go somewhere bright and crowded, but I had no proof of danger. Just a feeling, and some strange readings. The eclipse started slowly, just a tiny bite out of the sun at first, but almost immediately we noticed something wrong with the shadows on the mountainside below us. "Look," Dr. Murray whispered, pointing. "That's not right." The shadows of trees and rocks weren't falling where they should. Some were flowing uphill against gravity. Others were stretching too long for the angle of the sun. And in several places, shadows from different objects were reaching toward each other, joining together like puddles of water. The temperature. "Readings are dropping," I said, watching the digital display, "but only in specific spots." Dr. Murray nodded. 80 degrees in the sunlight, but look, 43 degrees in that shadow patch. I could see people's breath forming little clouds in those cold spots, even though it was a warm summer day everywhere else. As more of the sun disappeared behind the moon, my radio crackled to life. "All rangers, we have multiple distress calls. Hikers reporting unusual darkness conditions on trails. Respond if available." I picked up my radio. "This is Holbrook. What kind of unusual darkness?" "Hikers saying darkness is rising from the ground," the dispatcher replied, sounding confused. "Several groups saying they're trapped by moving shadows. I don't understand these reports. Over." "Tell them to get to open, sunny areas," I said, away from trees or anything casting shadows. Dr. Murray grabbed my arm suddenly. "Elaine, look there." About 100 yards down the mountain slope, something was moving. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from a cloud passing overhead. But there were no clouds today. This was different. A patch of perfect blackness gliding between the trees, deeper than any natural shadow should be. As we watched, it grew more defined. It took on a human shape, tall and thin with long arms, But it wasn't a person. It was like someone had cut a person-shaped hole in reality. You could only see it because it was darker than anything around it, an absence moving with purpose. The Umbra, I whispered, remembering Daniel's stories. The shadow thing moved slowly up the hill toward the observation tower. As it passed trees, their shadows stretched unnaturally to touch it, like they were being pulled toward it. Dr. Murray tried to take a picture, but his camera died instantly. When he checked, the battery was completely drained. He pulled out a backup camera that wasn't digital, an old film camera. It still worked, but when he developed the photos later, they showed only blackness. My flashlight, which I had brought just in case, flickered when I pointed it at the entity. The beam seemed to curve around it, like light was being bent away or eaten. "It's absorbing the light," Dr. Murray said. "Not just blocking it, consuming it." He grabbed a laser pointer from his equipment bag and aimed it at the creature. The red beam hit the darkness and simply disappeared. Then Dr. Murray did something brave and foolish. He began flashing the laser in patterns, dot, dot, dash, dot, dash, simple code. To our shock, the shadow entity stopped moving. Then it responded by creating spots of deeper darkness in the same pattern Murray had sent, but backward. "It's intelligent," Murray whispered. "It's communicating." The eclipse was reaching its maximum coverage now. About 80% of the sun was hidden. In that strange half-light, the shadow creature grew more solid-looking, more defined. With each passing minute, it seemed to gain strength. Then we noticed something else. Where the creature passed, people's shadows were affected. A woman near. The base of the tower suddenly gasped and jumped away from her own shadow, which had remained in place when she moved. "What's happening?" she cried out. I watched in horror as her shadow slowly peeled away from her feet and began sliding across the ground toward the approaching entity. When her shadow touched the creature, the woman grew slightly transparent, like a faded photograph. She didn't seem to notice the change in herself, but everyone around her did. People backed away from her, confused and frightened. "It's taking their shadows," I said to Dr. Murray. "But why?" We soon discovered that people who lost their shadows began to change. A man whose shadow was absorbed couldn't be photographed anymore. He simply didn't appear in the images. A child became increasingly hard to hear, her voice growing fainter, even though she was screaming in fear. The entity continued to approach the tower, growing larger and more defined with each shadow it collected. It no longer looked like a simple, human silhouette. Now it had details, the suggestion of clothing, fingers that were too long, a head that was slightly wrong in shape. People began to panic, running for their cars. But some couldn't run. The ones without shadows seemed rooted in place, growing fainter as they struggled. A forest ranger tried to help a shadowless woman to her car, but then looked confused, as if he couldn't quite remember why he'd approached her. He walked away, leaving her behind, his eyes sliding past her as if she wasn't there. "They're being erased," Dr. Murray said in a horrified whisper, "not just physically, from perception itself." As more shadows were absorbed, the entity grew, more powerful. The air around it shimmered with cold. Light itself seemed to bend and distort in its presence. Dr. Murray stepped forward with a camera flash, triggering it directly at the creature. For a split second, I saw something impossible. Inside the darkness was a swirling mass of stolen shadows, their human shapes still recognizable, reaching out with distorted arms. The flash enraged the entity. It surged forward suddenly, racing up the hill toward us. Dr. Murray stumbled back, but his own shadow betrayed him, stretching toward the creature instead of away from it. "Murray!" I screamed, grabbing for his arm. Too late! The shadow thing reached out with an impossibly long arm and tore Dr. Murray's shadow away from him like pulling tape off a surface. He screamed, not in pain, but in a kind of existential horror I hoped never to hear again. Dr. Murray didn't fall. He stood there, looking the same, yet fundamentally wrong. Light passed through him in strange ways. When he turned to me, people nearby didn't notice him move. Their eyes skipped over him as if he wasn't there. "Elaine," he said, his voice echoing oddly. "I can see what it is now. I can see what it's doing." But before he could tell me, the eclipse reached its maximum coverage. Darkness fell across the mountain in a way that wasn't just the dimming of daylight. It was hungry darkness, searching darkness. And in that moment, I knew we were facing something far more dangerous than just a creature that ate light. We were facing something that wanted to remake our world, shadow by shadow, into something darker and emptier than we could imagine. Dr. Murray stood before me, alive but changed. When other people looked his way, their eyes would slide right past him, like he was becoming invisible, even though I could still see him. "I can't be in photos anymore," he said, his voice sounding far away despite standing right next to me. "Look." He held up his phone and took a selfie. The screen showed only the mountain background, no Dr. Murray. He wasn't just missing from digital images. Later, when a tourist accidentally took a photo with him in the background, the developed film showed nothing but empty space where he stood. "People are forgetting me," he said quietly. "The woman at the front desk didn't remember checking me into my hotel this morning. She had my key, my paperwork, but didn't remember me at all." The eclipse was ending, the sun peeking out again, but the shadow entity, the Umbra, had already taken nearly a dozen shadows. All those people were like Murray now, present but fading from everyone's awareness. A family walked by us, and I noticed the father glance at a woman without her shadow. He frowned slightly, looked away, then back again with a confused expression. "Honey," he said to his wife, "was that woman there a second ago?" "What woman?" his wife asked, looking right at the shadowless person without seeing her. I grabbed Dr. Murray's arm. It felt solid but somehow wrong, like grabbing a balloon filled with sand instead of air. "We need to understand what this thing is doing," I said. "Why take shadows? What's the purpose?" Murray nodded. "I've been thinking about that. Let's go back to the station and review everything we know." At the ranger station, I pulled out old files while Murray struggled to use a pen. His hand kept passing through it until he concentrated hard. I found records from 1925, when the last eclipse had passed over this area. An entire church congregation, 43 people, had disappeared over the weeks following the eclipse. "Look at this," I said, pointing to old newspaper clippings. They weren't reported missing all at once. People just stopped mentioning them. Family members forgot they existed. "Like what's happening to me," Murray said grimly. We kept digging and found something strange. In photos from 1925, weeks after the church members had supposedly vanished, I could see them in the backgrounds of town gatherings, faint, transparent figures that no one was looking at or acknowledging. "They didn't vanish," I whispered. "They were erased from memory while still being physically present." As we worked, I noticed something alarming about Murray. When he wasn't focusing, his body seemed to change. Once, when reaching for a book on a high shelf, his arms stretched impossibly long. Another time, he seemed to slip through a narrow gap between filing cabinets that was too small for a normal person. "Murray," I said cautiously, "what's happening to you?" He looked at his hands, which now seemed slightly longer and thinner than before. "I'm changing, I can feel it. I'm becoming like it, like the Umbra. Not exactly, but something not fully in this world anymore." He demonstrated by pushing his hand partway through the solid wooden desk. "I exist between spaces now." A thought struck me. It's not just eating shadows. It's converting humans into beings like itself. Murray nodded slowly. "A colony. It's creating more of its kind, entities that can exist in a world of light." We found records of similar events dating back centuries. In 1925, the church congregation had slowly faded from town records and family memories. Before that, in 1878, A mining camp of 28 men had abandoned their claim according to official reports, but their equipment was left behind, meals still on tables. The pattern was always the same. People disappeared not by leaving, but by being forgotten. Most disturbing was how the entity targeted children. Their shadows were taken first, and they faded faster than adults. I remembered the young boy, Tyler, and how his shadow had moved independently. That evening, reports came in from across the park. Shadow-like figures moving through trees, flashlights failing in specific patterns. Most alarming were the temperature drops, patches of forest suddenly plunging to near-freezing temperatures in the summer heat. Murray was deteriorating fast. His voice now had an echo, and sometimes I could see through him when the light hit a certain way. "I'm remembering things I never knew," he said. "I can feel the others, the ones taken before. We're connected somehow. Can you sense the main entity, the original Umbra?" He closed his eyes. "Yes, it's old. So old. It's been taking shadows for centuries, building a family. It needs the eclipse to fully manifest, but once it does, it can create these doorways, places where light behaves differently." I remembered my astronomy background and had a sudden thought. Murray, what if this thing isn't from Earth at all? What if it's from somewhere else, somewhere the physics of light works differently? Murray's eyes widened. Of course, that's why it needs astronomical events to manifest fully. It exists in a dimension perpendicular to our own. I pulled out my old research notes from my astrophysics days. There are certain stars, dying stars, that emit very specific wavelengths of ultraviolet light. Murray suddenly stepped back, his partly transparent form shimmering. "That hurts," he said. "What? Your diagram of that star's light spectrum, looking at it, burns." I stared at the paper, then at Murray. Light from dying stars hurts it? Could that be a weapon? I dug through more of my old equipment and found a specialized UV light I'd once used for star photography. When I turned it on, Murray hissed and moved to the other side of the room. "That's it," I said. "Certain ultraviolet frequencies. They must be harmful to the Umbra and anything connected to it." Using my knowledge of astrophysics and Murray's new connection to the shadow realm, we designed special UV light traps. We modified flashlights and lanterns to emit the specific frequency that seemed to repel the shadow entities. That night, we tested our theory. Small shadow creatures had split from the main Umbra and were moving through the forest. I set up a UV light trap near a campground where shadows had been acting strangely. The trap worked, sort of. When a small shadow entity crossed into the UV light field, it became trapped, unable to move through the specific wavelength. But it wasn't destroyed. "Just contained. We need something stronger," Murray said, his voice now sounding like it came from the bottom of a well. "The main entity, the Umbra, is too powerful for these little traps." Murray was now spending more time in his new form than his human one. He could slip through solid objects and move without being seen. Sometimes I'd be talking to him only to realize he'd been gone for minutes, traveling through shadows to scout the forest. "It's getting worse," he told me when he returned from one such trip. "The Umbra is creating a nest, a place where dawn never comes." "Where?" I asked. "Deep in the forest. I could feel it pulling me there." He looked at his hands, now so thin they were almost skeletal. "Elaine, I don't have much time left as myself. Soon I'll be just another shadow." "No," I said firmly. "We're going to stop this thing. We're going to get your shadow back." But even as I said it, I could see more changes in him. When he moved, he left blurry after images in the air. His eyes had lost their color, becoming dark pools that reflected light like a cat's eyes at night. "There's something else," Murray said hesitantly. "The children it takes, they're different. They change faster, but they also seem to remember more of their human lives. The Umbra wants them especially." "Why children?" Their shadows are newer, more flexible. The Umbra can shape them more easily. Murray's voice dropped. It's building an army, Elaine. And soon it will be strong enough to create permanent darkness, large enough to sustain its kind forever. I looked outside at the setting sun. Night was coming, and with it, the Umbra would grow stronger. We had to act soon. I gathered everything. We'd learned the UV light frequency that hurt the shadow creatures, my astronomy knowledge, Murray's new connection to the shadow realm. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Tomorrow, I said, we find its nest and we fight back. Murray nodded, but I could tell he was losing hope. Parts of him were already fading into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness he now partially belonged to. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in my cabin seemed alive, watching me, and maybe they were. I kept all the lights on and stared at my own shadow on the wall, wondering if it would be next to betray me. Morning came, but not everywhere. Parts of the park remained, dark even as the sun rose. A 2-mile circle of forest near Cades Cove stayed in complete darkness, as if night refused to end there. We need to evacuate the park, I told Senior Ranger Phillips. This time, he didn't argue. The reports were too strange, too numerous. Tourists had filmed patches of moving darkness. Rangers had disappeared from radio contact. Weather stations were recording impossible temperature drops. I don't understand what's happening, Phillips admitted, but I know it's not safe. By noon, the park roads were filled with cars leaving. Rangers used bullhorns to direct people to the exits. Overhead, news helicopters circled, filming the strange darkness that refused to disappear in daylight. Dr. Murray met me behind the ranger station. He looked barely human now. His body shifted and rippled like smoke when he moved. Only his eyes remained the same, scared, determined, kind. I found it, he said. The center of everything. It's in a cave system below Grotto Falls. Are you sure? He nodded. I can feel it pulling me there. All the shadow people are being drawn to it. I loaded up a backpack with our modified UV lights, extra batteries, and my old astronomy equipment. We hiked toward Grotto Falls, staying in sunny patches when possible. As we got closer, the forest grew darker, not the normal shade under trees, but a thick, heavy darkness that light couldn't fully penetrate. Animals fled past us, deer and foxes running away from the caves. Even birds were flying in the opposite direction. Nothing wanted to be near that unnatural darkness. The entrance to the cave system was behind the waterfall. The falling water should have sparkled in the midday sun, but instead it looked dull, as if the light was being drained from it before it could reflect. Are you ready? I asked Murray. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied, his voice now sounding like many voices speaking together. Inside the cave, our flashlights barely worked. The beams traveled only a few feet before fading, as if the darkness was too thick for light to cut through. Only my special UV light worked properly, creating a purple-blue bubble around us. We moved deeper, following Murray's instincts. This way, he would say at each fork in the tunnel, drawn by some sense I couldn't understand. The temperature dropped with each step. Soon I could see my breath in the beam of the UV light. My fingers grew numb even inside my gloves. Look, Murray whispered, pointing at the cave wall. Ancient drawings covered the stone, pictures of eclipses, of human figures with their shadows being pulled away. And something else, a star pattern I recognized from my astronomy days, the exact stars that produced the ultraviolet light frequency that hurt the shadow creatures. Someone knew, I said. Someone figured this out before. The tunnel widened into a large cavern. My light caught the edges of something that made my stomach turn. Bodies, dozens of them arranged in a circle. But they weren't recent. They were ancient, perfectly preserved but hollow, like empty human shells. Oh, what happened to them? I whispered. Their insides were taken, Murray said, pulled out through their shadows. In the center of the body circle stood a tall stone carved with the same star pattern from the wall, and surrounding it were shadowy figures, some almost solid, some barely visible, people without shadows, drawn here by the Umbra. And then I saw it, the main entity, the original shadow. It hung in the center of the cavern like a tear in reality, a perfect darkness that seemed to go on forever. It was huge now, no longer human-shaped, but a swirling mass of stolen shadows, constantly shifting and reforming. Some of the shadow people moved toward us. I recognized a few, tourists whose shadows had been taken during the eclipse. They didn't speak, just reached out with arms that stretched too long. "Murray, what do we do?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. Murray looked at me, then at the Umbra. "I think I know how to stop it, but I won't be coming back." Before I could ask what he meant, Murray stepped forward, away from the protection of my UV light. His body rippled and stretched, becoming more shadow than human. "Murray." "No," I called. "It's okay, Elaine," he said. "I'm already halfway there, but I'm still me enough to make a choice." He turned toward the massive shadow entity and started walking. The smaller shadow people backed away, sensing something they didn't understand. "What are you doing?" I called. "After him." "Creating internal conflict," he replied without turning around. "I'm choosing to join with it while I still have free will, while I'm still partly human." Murray reached the edge of the swirling darkness and stepped in. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Umbra began to change. It pulsed and contracted as if fighting itself. Screams filled the cave, not physical sounds, but something I felt in my mind. The shadow people around the cavern clutched their heads, falling to their knees. "Now, Elaine," Murray's voice came from within the darkness. "Use the star pattern. Create the light." I fumbled with my backpack, pulling out the specialized equipment I'd brought. Using the stone carving as a guide, I set up UV emitters in the pattern of the specific stars we'd identified. My hands shook as I turned them on, one by one. Each emitter cast a beam of ultraviolet light in exactly the pattern shown on the stone. When the final light switched on, the beams met in the center of the cavern, creating a pattern of light that matched the star formation precisely. The effect was immediate. The Umbra shrieked, a sound like tearing metal that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The shadow entity thrashed and twisted, trying to escape the light pattern, but unable to move through it. "It's working," I shouted. The Umbra began to shrink, collapsing in on itself. As it compressed, I caught glimpses of Murray inside it, his form still visible among the swirling shadows. He looked at me once, smiled, and then closed his eyes in concentration. With a sound like thunder, the shadow entity imploded. A blast of wind knocked me off my feet. When I stood up, the Umbra was gone, and so was Murray. But something else was happening. The shadow people around the cave were changing. Their forms grew more solid, more human, and spreading from their feet were new shadows, not their original ones, but shadows nonetheless. Outside, sunshine broke through the unnatural darkness that had covered this part of the forest. Light returned to normal. The temperature rose. I helped the recovering people out of the cave. They were confused, disoriented, but alive and solid. They cast shadows again, even if those shadows sometimes moved strangely when not watched closely. Park rangers found us hours later. The story we told was simple. A gas leak in the cave system had caused hallucinations and confusion. It was easier than explaining the truth. Who would believe us anyway? In the weeks that followed, life in the park returned mostly to normal. The eclipse was over. The Umbra was gone, banished back to whatever dimension it had come from. But there were changes. The people who had lost their shadows and gotten new ones were different. Their eyes reflected light in the dark, like animals. They avoided cameras and mirrors. Some claimed to see things others couldn't. And there were places in the forest where light still behaved strangely, spots where compasses spun in circles, and where shadows fell in impossible directions. 6 months after what became known as the Darkness event, I was working a night shift checking campgrounds to make sure fires were properly extinguished. I stopped to rest on a large rock, turning off my flashlight to enjoy the quiet darkness. That's when I noticed it, my shadow cast by the moonlight. It had separated slightly from my feet, stretching toward a particularly dark patch of forest on its own. I quickly turned my flashlight back on, and my shadow snapped back to normal, but I had seen it. A reminder that some part of the Umbra remained, in the forest, in the people who had been changed, and maybe even in me. Last week I stood at an overlook watching the sunset with dozens of other tourists. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I happened to look down at our shadows stretched across the ground. My heart stopped. All of our shadows, every single one, were pointing toward the same spot, regardless of where the sun was. They all reached toward a patch of perfect darkness forming between the trees, a darkness that shouldn't exist in the bright evening light. I alone noticed it. I alone remembered what it meant, and I knew that the Umbra wasn't gone forever. It was just waiting for another eclipse, another chance to steal our shadows and replace our world of light with something darker, colder, and hungrier than we could ever imagine. Sometimes when I turn off my light at night, I hear something that might be Dr. Murray's voice, whispering from the shadows. Be ready, it seems to say. Next time, be ready, and I will be. My name is Wesley Thornton. I'm 45 years old, and I work as a park ranger in the Everglades National Park in Florida. Before this job, I was a combat medic in Vietnam. I came here looking for peace and quiet after seeing too much death in the war. Turns out the swamp had other plans for me. It all started on a muggy June morning, the kind of morning where your shirt sticks to your back before you even start moving. The air was thick with moisture, and a blanket of mist hovered over the water as I guided my airboat through the twisted waterways of the Everglades. I was out early, keeping an eye out for poachers. They like to sneak in at dawn to hunt alligators and other protected animals. The engine of my airboat hummed as I navigated through the narrow channels. Tall grass swayed on either side of me, and occasionally I'd spot the eyes of an alligator watching me pass by. This was my normal routine, peaceful, predictable. I had no idea that morning would change everything. About 2 hours into my patrol, I spotted something unusual in the distance, a fishing boat drifting sideways with no one steering it. As I got closer, I cut my engine and let my boat glide toward it. Something didn't feel right. Hello? Anyone on board? I called out but got no answer. When I pulled alongside and looked in, my stomach turned. The boat wasn't empty, not exactly. There were no people, but what I found instead was far worse. Piles of what looked like human skin. Complete human. Skins, like someone had just stepped right out of them and walked away. They were intact, hollow, like the shells cicadas leave behind when they molt. 3 of them. I've seen a lot of terrible things in my life, especially in Vietnam, but this was different. My hands trembled as I reached for my radio. Base, this is Thornton. I've got a situation out in Sector 7. Abandoned fishing. Boat with... I paused, not sure how to explain what I was seeing. With evidence of missing persons, requesting backup and police notification. The radio crackled. Copy that, Thornton. Help is on the way, ETA 20 minutes. As I waited, I noticed something in the water. At first I thought it was just the current, but then I realized the ripples were following a pattern, circling. My boat. Something large was moving just beneath the surface, tracking me. I grabbed my paddle and slapped it hard against the water's surface. The ripples stopped immediately. Whatever it was, it moved away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When backup arrived, we towed the fishing boat back to the ranger station. Word had spread fast, and by the time we docked, the local medical examiner and Dr. Vivian Hayes, an entomologist who was doing research in the park, were waiting for us. Dr. Hayes was in her mid-30s with short brown hair and glasses. She looked concerned as she approached me. "Ranger Thornton," she said, "while you were out, I've been observing some very strange behavior among the insect populations. Swarms moving in synchronized patterns, almost like they're being controlled. Have you noticed anything unusual in the wildlife?" Before I could answer, the medical examiner called us over to where he was examining the shed skins. "In 30 years on the job, I've never seen anything like this," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "These aren't cuttings or removals. It's as if the victims literally slipped out of their skin while still alive. There's no trauma, no cutting marks. It's medically impossible." I looked at the hollow faces of the skins, their empty eye sockets and gaping mouths frozen in expressions of shock. Whatever had happened to these people, I knew we were dealing with something beyond normal explanation. And somewhere deep in the Everglades, 3 people were walking around without their skin. Or something worse was walking around wearing their bodies. After we secured the boat and its disturbing contents, I knew I needed to talk to someone who might understand what we were dealing with. The Seminole people have lived in these swamps for hundreds of years. If anyone knew about strange happenings in the Everglades, it would be them. The next morning, I drove to the small Seminole community on the edge of the park. Raymond Osceola was an elder, respected by both his people and the Park Service. He lived in a simple house with a porch that faced the water. When I arrived, he was sitting in an old wooden chair, as if he'd been expecting me. "I heard about what you found, Ranger Thornton," Raymond said, his voice quiet but clear. "The empty skins." I sat down across from him. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" Raymond looked out at the water for a long time before answering. "My grandfather told stories of Hahethlom, the Ancient One, the one who wears the dead and commands the hungry swarms." A chill ran down my spine despite the humid heat. "What does that mean?" "The old stories say it sleeps for many years, then wakes when its home is threatened. It gathers the crawling things, the biting things. They become its eyes, its hands." Raymond turned to look at me. "The empty skins you found? Hahethlom doesn't kill its prey, it changes them." I wanted to dismiss it as just an old story, but after what I'd seen, I couldn't. "How do we stop it?" I asked. Raymond shook his head. "My grandfather's stories never said." That night, I went on patrol again. I couldn't sleep anyway, not with the image of those hollow skins stuck in my head. I took my airboat deeper into the park than usual, to areas tourists never see. The moon was bright enough to see without a flashlight, but I kept one ready. Around midnight, I cut the engine and drifted in a small clearing surrounded by cypress trees. The night was alive with sounds: frogs croaking, birds calling, insects buzzing. Then suddenly everything went quiet. I switched on my flashlight and swept the beam across the surrounding brush. Hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny eyes reflected the light back at me, insects watching me from every bush and tree. They weren't moving randomly like normal bugs. They were perfectly still, all facing my direction, like soldiers waiting for orders. As quickly as I noticed them, they scattered in perfect unison, moving like a single creature with many parts. Never in all my years in the Everglades had I seen insects behave like that. The next day, I found another abandoned boat. This one had been there longer, partially submerged near a small island. Inside was a waterproof bag containing a camera. I took it back to the station to develop the film. The photos started normal enough, tourists taking pictures of alligators, birds, and each other, but in the background of the third photo, barely visible behind some trees, was a tall, thin figure. In the next photo, it was closer, and in each picture after that, it moved nearer to the people, though they seemed unaware of its presence. In the final photo, it was standing just feet behind them, its head tilted at a weird angle, no human neck. Good manage. Its body was skinny like someone who hadn't eaten in months, but tall, maybe 7 feet. Its face wasn't clear, but it wasn't human, more like an insect's head on a human-like body. I showed the photos to Dr. Hayes. She looked worried as she studied them. "I've been mapping the insect populations throughout the park," she said, spreading a map on the table. "They're disappearing in specific areas, up to 80% gone in these circles." She pointed to several spots marked in red. "It's as if something is gathering them up." I remembered what Raymond had said about commanding the hungry swarms and felt sick. The next day, I convinced Marcus Freeman, one of our biologists, to come with me to investigate one of the areas on Dr. Hayes' map. Marcus was younger than me, eager and smart, but he hadn't seen combat like I had. He didn't know how to sense danger yet. We took my airboat to a remote section of the park where Hayes had marked one of her red circles. From a distance, we could see something was wrong with the vegetation. Plants that should have been green and thriving were brown and dead in perfect circles, like something had drained the life from them. "This isn't natural," Marcus said, taking samples of the dead plants. "Looks like some kind of rapid dehydration, but I've never seen a pattern this precise." As we pushed deeper into the area, we found it, a structure made from mud, sticks, and animal parts. It looked like a crude hut, but there was something deeply wrong about it. The bones and dried skins of animals were woven into the walls in patterns that made my eyes hurt to look at them. "We should call this in," I said. But curiosity got the better of us. Inside the hut, shelves made of twisted branches held what looked like souvenirs. Watches, wallets, jewelry, cameras. Some items looked new. Others were old and faded, dating back decades. Each was carefully arranged, like exhibits in a museum. There were labels, too, made from tree bark with symbols scratched into them that I couldn't read. "Wesley," Marcus whispered, picking up a Park Service badge. "This belonged to Jim Holden. He disappeared in '64. A sudden buzzing sound made us both turn. A large hornet, bigger than any I'd ever seen, hovered at the entrance to the hut. Before I could react, it darted forward and stung Marcus on the neck. He slapped it away, crushing it against his skin. "Damn bugs," he muttered, rubbing the spot. But something was wrong. The puncture wound was already swelling, the skin around, it turning an unnatural shade of purple. And just beneath the surface, something moved. "We need to get you medical help," I told Marcus, already pulling him toward the airboat. The sting was getting worse by the minute. The skin around it had turned dark, almost black, and the swelling had spread down his neck to his shoulder. "It's just a sting," he said, but his voice was weak and his face had gone pale. "I've been stung before." "Not like this," I said. By the time we reached the airboat, Marcus could barely walk. I had to help him in, and his skin felt hot, like he had a bad fever. We were at least 2 hours from the ranger station, and I wasn't sure he would last that long. "Hang in there, Marcus," I said as I started the engine. "We'll get you to a doctor." But Marcus wasn't listening. His eyes had glazed over, and he was muttering words I couldn't understand. The veins in his neck and face had turned black, visible under his skin like dark rivers. And there was something else. Small movements under his skin, like tiny creatures, swimming just beneath the surface. I pushed the airboat as fast as it would go, racing against whatever was happening to Marcus. Night fell as we traveled, and I had to use the spotlight to find my way through the twisting channels. Marcus got worse with each passing minute. The movements under his skin grew more active, and he started scratching at his arms and face, drawing blood. "There's something inside me," he whispered. "I can feel them moving." I wanted to tell him he was imagining things, but I had seen those movements too. Whatever had been in that hornet's sting was now spreading throughout his body. We were still an hour from the station when Marcus started convulsing. I had to stop the boat and hold him down to keep him from falling into the water. His fever was so high that touching him was like touching a hot stove. "We need to keep moving," I said after his convulsions stopped. "Just a little longer." But when I tried to restart the engine, it made a sickening grinding noise and died. I opened the engine cover and shined my flashlight inside. The engine was filled with insects, cockroaches, beetles, and centipedes crawling over every surface. They had somehow gotten inside and chewed through wires and clogged air intakes. We were stranded. I tried the radio but got only static. We would have to wait until morning and hope someone would come looking for us. I made Marcus as comfortable as I could in the boat and kept watch through the night, swatting away the constant stream of insects that seemed drawn to us. Just before dawn, Marcus's condition got much worse. His breathing became shallow and rapid, and his whole body trembled. Then, without warning, his skin split open along his arms and chest. I watched in horror as thousands of insects poured out from inside him, ants, beetles, wasps, and things I'd never seen before, all crawling out of my friend's body. They rose up above him, swarming together in a cloud that slowly took on a human-like shape, a head, shoulders, arms. The shape hovered over Marcus's body for a moment as if looking down at him, then scattered in all directions, disappearing into the swamp. I thought it was over, that Marcus was dead. But then his empty body twitched. His head turned toward me with jerky, unnatural movements, like a puppet being controlled by someone who didn't know how to work the strings. His mouth opened and closed several times before sounds came out. "Flesh. Vessel. Incomplete," said a voice that wasn't Marcus's. It was deeper, with a strange buzzing quality, like many voices speaking together, but sufficient for now. I backed away as far as the small boat would allow. "What are you?" Marcus's body sat up, moving in a way no human should move, joints bending at impossible angles. His eyes were gone, the sockets now filled with small crawling things. "I am the Scavenger King," the thing inside Marcus said. "I have worn many skins through many ages." "What did you do to Marcus?" I demanded, fighting to keep my voice steady. "His flesh hosts my children now. His mind joins the colony." The thing tilted Marcus's head at an unnatural angle. "As you will, when the time comes." With that, the body that had been Marcus Freeman stood up in the boat, causing it to rock dangerously. Then, without another word, it jumped into the water and disappeared beneath the surface. I sat frozen, unable to process what I had just seen. My friend was gone, taken over by something that called itself the Scavenger King, and it had said I would be next. Dawn broke over the swamp, and with the first light I managed to clear enough insects from the engine to get it running again. I had to get back to the station to warn the others about what was happening. As I navigated through the morning mist, the swamp seemed different somehow. The familiar landmarks I'd used for years were hard to find, as if the landscape itself had shifted overnight. I found myself going in circles, passing the same cypress tree 3 times before realizing something was very wrong. After hours of confused navigation, I spotted what looked like another airboat in the distance. Relief washed over me. A search. "Party!" Someone had come looking for us when we didn't return. As I got closer, I could see 4 rangers in the boat, all people I knew well. I waved and called out to them, "Over here! I need help!" They turned toward me in perfect unison, their movements too coordinated, too precise. As their boat approached mine, I could see something was wrong with their faces. Their expressions were blank, their eyes unfocused. They moved as one, like they were all controlled by the same mind. "Wesley Thornton," they said in unison, voices flat and emotionless. "You will join the colony?" One of them, Ranger Davis, reached out to me. His sleeve rode up, revealing an arm covered in tiny holes, like something had burrowed out from inside. As he got closer, I could see movement in his eyes and mouth, insects crawling just beneath the surface. These weren't my colleagues anymore. They were hollow shells, just like what had happened to Marcus, now controlled by the insect colonies, living inside them. I grabbed my emergency flare gun and fired it at the fuel tank of their boat. The explosion lit up the morning sky. and sent burning debris flying in all directions. The controlled rangers scattered, their bodies jerking wildly as the insects inside them reacted to the fire. I used the distraction to push my boat to full speed, heading in what I hoped was the direction of the ranger station. I didn't look back to see if they were following me. I just knew I had to get away, had to warn someone about what was happening in the Everglades. The Scavenger King was real. It was here, and it was taking over. I pushed the airboat as hard as I could, praying I was heading in the right direction. My hands shook on the steering handle, and every sound in the swamp made me jump. After what felt like forever, I finally saw the outline of the ranger station through the trees. As I approached, I saw flames. Parts of the station were on fire, and there were no people around. No rescue teams, no police, nobody. Just empty park vehicles parked at odd angles, like they'd been abandoned in a hurry. I cut the engine and drifted the last few yards, afraid to make noise. The main building seemed intact, but the windows were dark. I grabbed my flashlight and the hunting knife I kept in the boat, then made my way to the station as quietly as I could. The door was unlocked. Inside, papers were scattered everywhere, chairs overturned, like there had been a struggle. I called out softly, "Hello? Anyone here?" A noise came from the storage closet, a soft thumping. I raised my knife and slowly opened the door. Dr. Hayes was inside, crouched in the corner. When she saw me, her eyes went wide with fear, then relief. "Wesley, thank God," she whispered. "Are you still you?" I nodded, understanding her fear. "I'm still me. What happened here?" She pulled me into the closet and closed the door. I saw she had drawn circles of salt around herself on the floor. "The insects won't cross salt," she explained, seeing my confusion. "I've been hiding in here since yesterday when everyone started changing." She told me that shortly after I left with Marcus, rangers and staff began acting strangely. They moved together, spoke in unison. Some had visible insect activity under their skin. When they started attacking the people who were still normal, Hayes locked herself in the closet with as much salt as she could find. "I've been researching what's happening," she said, pointing to her laptop. "I think I know what we're dealing with. It's not just insects, it's something ancient that can control them. Some kind of prehistoric entity that's been dormant in the deepest parts of the swamp." "The Seminole elder called it Hahithlom," I said. "The Scavenger King." Hayes nodded. "It hibernates for decades, maybe centuries. It only wakes up when something threatens its territory." She showed me satellite maps of the Everglades. "Look at these water level changes over the past year. The new water management project has been draining parts of the swamp that have been underwater for generations." The radio on the wall crackled to life, making us both jump. Reports came in from across the park, missing people found wandering. With blank expressions, others found as empty husks. It was happening everywhere. "We took soil samples from around that structure you found," Hayes said. "There's an unknown fungal compound in it. I've never seen anything like it before." She showed me pictures on her laptop of strange glowing spores. "It seems to act as some kind of conductor, a way for the creature to control different insect species, as if they're all part of one mind." I remembered what the thing inside Marcus had said: "Join the colony." "The compound is spreading through the groundwater," Hayes continued, her voice shaking. "If it reaches the aquifer, it could contaminate water sources beyond the park, into populated areas." "How do we stop it?" I asked. "We need to find the source, the main colony. Destroy that and maybe the connection breaks." I thought about what Raymond had told me about the water management projects. "I think it's been here all along," I said. "The water levels dropping woke it up. The ranger who went missing in the 60s, his badge was in that structure." "What if this thing has been taking people for decades, whenever the water levels go down enough for it to reach them?" Hayes pulled up more maps on her computer. "There's a pattern here. Missing persons reports in the Everglades spike during drought years. And look at these locations. She pointed to several spots marked on the map. They all center around these ancient burial mounds that are usually underwater. I remembered something else, what I'd seen through the boat window just before Marcus transformed. I saw it, I whispered. The real thing, not just the bodies it controls. It was watching us from the shore. What did it look like? Hayes asked. I described what I'd seen. A tall, thin figure with a chitinous exoskeleton, multiple limbs, and a head that reminded me more of an insect than a human. And it was surrounded by insects. They swirled around it like a living cloud. We need supplies, Hayes said. If we're going to find this thing and stop it, we need weapons, communication equipment. We carefully made our way to the supply room. The station was eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just silence. We filled backpacks with flashlights, radios, first aid kits, and anything else that might help. I grabbed the emergency flare gun and all the flares I could find, remembering how the controlled rangers had reacted to fire. As Hayes reached for a radio on a high shelf, something crashed through the window above her. A bird, but not normal. Its eyes were missing, and insects poured from its open beak. It flew straight at Hayes, clawing at her face. I swatted it away with a broom, and it hit the wall with a wet thud. Instead of blood, tiny beetles and worms spilled from its broken body. It's not just insects anymore, Hayes said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's spreading to other animals. We hurried back to the relative safety of the storage closet. Through the small window, we could see movement outside. Small animals, squirrels, rats, even a fox, were moving in perfect formation across the grounds. They walked in precise lines, turning at exact angles, like soldiers marching in a parade. It's gaining control of the entire ecosystem, Hayes said. But why? What does it want? Based on the maps and the information we had gathered, we determined the most likely location for the central hive, an area in the deepest part of the Everglades, where an old Seminole burial ground had recently been exposed by receding waters. That's where we'll find it, I said. The heart of the colony. We prepared as best we could for the journey. I remembered my training from Vietnam, how to move quietly, how to survive, how to fight when necessary. I hadn't thought about those skills in years, had tried to forget them. Now they might be the only thing keeping us alive. The entity seems to fear fire, I said, creating makeshift flamethrowers from aerosol cans and lighters. And salt seems to repel the insects it controls. What else? Sound might disrupt it, Hayes suggested. The way insects communicate is often through vibration and frequency. If we could generate the right sound wave, it might disrupt the hive-mind connection. We gathered what we needed and waited until nightfall. The darkness would make it harder for us to see, but it would also make it harder for the controlled animals and people to spot us. Our plan was simple but dangerous. Find the central hive and destroy it. As night fell, we slipped out of the station and into my airboat. The swamp was unnaturally quiet, as if all life was holding its breath. I started the engine, and we headed into the heart of darkness, toward what we hoped was the source of the nightmare. What we didn't know then was that we were already being watched by thousands of tiny eyes, and that the Scavenger King was waiting for us. The journey through the night swamp was the longest of my life. Every splash in the water, every rustle in the trees made us freeze. Twice we had to hide under branches as controlled animals passed by. Once a group of deer moving in perfect lines, and later a pack of raccoons walking side by side like they were tied together. Dr. Hayes sat at the front of the boat with a map and compass, guiding us toward the old burial mound. I kept the engine as quiet as possible, moving slowly to avoid detection. "We're getting close," Hayes whispered after about 2 hours. The burial ground should be just beyond those cypress trees. As we approached, I cut the engine and let the boat drift. A thick mist hung over the water, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. But there was something else in the air too. a smell like rotting plants and old meat. "We should continue on foot," I said. "The noise of the boat will give us away." We pulled the airboat onto a small patch of dry land and gathered our gear. The ground felt strange underfoot, softer than it should be, almost squishy. I shined my flashlight down and nearly threw up. The soil was moving. Millions of tiny insects crawling over each other, so dense they looked like the ground itself. Hayes pointed to a trail through the trees. "That way." We walked carefully, trying not to disturb the living carpet beneath. Our feet. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. After about 5 minutes, we reached a clearing and saw it, the burial mound. But it wasn't what I expected. The mound was alive with movement. Insects swarmed over every inch of it, crawling in and out of holes in the earth. The entire structure pulsed like a giant heart, the insects moving in rhythm with each beat. At the center was a massive termite mound, but twisted into an unnatural shape, almost like a throne. "My God," Hayes whispered, her scientific curiosity momentarily overcoming her fear. "It's incredible. The insects have built a superstructure." I noticed something else. Half buried in the termite mound was what looked like a human body, but not fresh. The clothes were old-fashioned, like from the 1800s. "Look," I said, pointing. "There's someone in there." We crept closer, keeping low and quiet. The body was that of a man, dressed in what might have once been an explorer's outfit. He was partially preserved, mummified by the insects. His mouth was open in a silent scream, and clutched in his dried hand was a small book. Hayes carefully reached out and took the book. It was a journal, the pages yellow with age, but somehow preserved. She opened it, and we read by the dim light of our covered flashlight. April 15th, 1879. My 3rd week studying the unusual insect behaviors in this region. I have observed what appears to be coordinated movement among different species, something science has never recorded before. The journal entries continued, describing how the naturalist had discovered the burial mound and the strange fungus growing there, how he had begun to hear voices in his head and feel things moving under his skin. The final entry was shaky, barely readable. "They are inside me now. I can feel them. They speak as one voice. They say I am becoming part of something greater. The colony needs my body. The king is coming." He was the first, Hayes said, or at least one of them. The entity used him to start building this place. This isn't just about territory, I realized. It's creating something here. We continued to explore the area, keeping our distance from the central mound. Hayes took soil samples while I kept watch. The insect activity was incredible. They were working together in ways I'd never seen before, building structures, moving materials, all in perfect harmony. As Hayes bent down to collect another sample, I heard a high-pitched whine. A cloud of mosquitoes descended on her, so thick they looked like dark smoke. She screamed and waved her arms, but they covered her in seconds. Rushed to help, spraying her with insect repellent, but it had no effect. The mosquitoes clung to her, their tiny bodies swelling with blood. By the time I managed to swat enough away, Hayes was pale and barely conscious. They had drained her, blood with unnatural speed. "Vivian! Stay with me," I said, helping her to sit against a tree. Her eyes fluttered open, but something was wrong. There was movement in them, tiny shapes swimming across her eyeballs. "Too late," she said, but her voice had changed. It had that same buzzing quality I'd heard from Marcus. "She's part of the colony now." I backed away as Hayes's body stood up. She should have been too weak to move after losing so much blood, but something else was controlling her now. "Wesley Thornton," she said, her head tilting unnaturally. "The colony has been watching you. You are strong. Your body will make a suitable vessel." "What are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Hayes's mouth smiled, but her eyes remained empty. "I am the future. I am adaptation." Her body moved forward stiffly. Your kind has changed the world, poisoned the water, heated the air. The old ways of life are ending, so you're what? Taking over, using human bodies. Cultivating, Hayes corrected. Your bodies make perfect vessels for my children, warm, mobile, capable of traveling beyond the swamp. I realized with horror what the entity was saying. You're breeding insects that can live inside humans. You're creating hybrids. The climate changes. The waters rise and fall in new patterns. My children must adapt or die. Hayes's body gestured around at the massive insect structure. This is the new colony, and it will spread beyond this place. I had heard enough. I pulled out my makeshift flamethrower and aimed it at the central mound. Not if I stop you first. I squeezed the trigger, sending a stream of fire toward the termite throne. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The entire mound seemed to scream, not with a human voice, but with the sound of millions of insects chittering at once. The insects scattered, revealing more of the structure beneath. I saw more bodies embedded in the mound, some recent, some ancient, all in various stages of decomposition and transformation. Hayes's body lunged at me, but I dodged out of the way. You cannot stop evolution, Wesley Thornton. The colony will survive. I continued burning whatever I could, moving around the mound and setting fire to different sections. The heat was intense, and I could hear popping sounds as insect eggs exploded in the flames. Then I felt it. A presence. Something massive was moving toward us through the trees. The ground trembled with each step. It emerged into the clearing. The Scavenger King, in its true form. It stood at least 8 feet tall, a grotesque combination of insect and human features. Its body was segmented like a massive ant, with a chitinous exoskeleton that gleamed in the firelight. Multiple limbs extended from its torso, some human-like arms, others more like the legs of a mantis or spider, but it was the head that made me freeze in terror. A crown-like structure of iridescent beetles formed what might be called a face, constantly shifting and rearranging themselves. Hundreds of tiny eyes looked out from between the beetles, all focused on me. Around it swirled a living cloud of insects so dense it was like a second skin. They moved with it, extending outward like tentacles to touch trees and ground as it walked. I can feel your fear, it said, its voice coming not from any mouth, but from the synchronized buzzing of thousands of wings. Your heart beats faster. Your body produces chemicals that attract my children. I backed away, keeping the flamethrower aimed at it. Stay back! The creature tilted its crown head curiously. You humans fear what you do not understand, but I have lived in this swamp since before your kind walked upright. I have watched you evolve. Now it is my turn. It raised one of its limbs, and Hayes's body walked to stand beside it. This one's mind has joined with the colony. Her knowledge serves us now. She understands what is happening to the world. I felt a sharp pain in my leg and looked down to see a large centipede biting through my pants. I kicked it away, but more insects were crawling up my boots. I fired the flamethrower at the ground around me, creating a circle of fire. Your weapons cannot stop the inevitable, the Scavenger King said. The colony will spread. Your cities will become our new nests. As it spoke, I noticed something, a metal pipe sticking out of the ground near the burial mound. I recognized it as part of the water management system, one of the drainage pipes that had been lowering the water table. That gave me an idea. During my time in Vietnam, I had learned about the natural gas pockets that sometimes formed in swamps. If this area had been underwater for centuries before being drained, there might be gas trapped beneath the surface. I needed a distraction. I threw my backpack directly at the creature and fired the flamethrower at it in the same motion. The pack exploded in flames, and the Scavenger King reared back, the insects around it scattering in confusion. I ran to the airboat and grabbed the emergency kit. Inside, was what I needed. Road flares and the small explosive charges we used for clearing fallen trees. As I worked, I felt stinging all over my body. Ants, wasps, spiders, all biting and injecting their venom. My skin burned and my vision began to blur. I could feel something else too, a pressure in my mind, like someone trying to open a door that was locked. "Join us," whispered a voice in my head. "Become one with the colony." I fought against it, focusing on the task at hand. I set the charges around the drainage pipe, my hands shaking as more insects crawled over them. The voice in my head grew louder, more insistent. Images flashed before my eyes, the collective memory of the colony, centuries of watching from the shadows. The Scavenger King approached, its massive form looming over me. "Your resistance is impressive, but futile. Soon you will be one of us." With the last of my strength, I pressed the detonator and dove into the water. The explosion was bigger than I expected. The charges ignited the natural gas pocket beneath the mound. Fire erupted from the ground, engulfing the entire area in flames. The Scavenger King screamed, a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before, part insect buzz, part human wail. Its body began to break apart, the insects that formed it scattering. In panic as the fire spread, I swam as far as I could before the pain and venom overtook me. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was the night sky turned orange with fire, and insects falling like rain into the water around me. Beep, beep, beep. The steady sound of a heart monitor pulled me back to consciousness. My eyes felt heavy, like they were glued shut. When I finally managed to open them, bright hospital lights made me squint. "He's awake," someone said. A nurse leaned over me, checking my vitals. "Mr. Thornton, can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. She helped me sip some water through a straw. "Where am I?" I finally managed to ask. "Miami General Hospital," she said. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. The search and rescue team found you floating in the water about 5 miles from where the fire started." Fire. The memory came rushing back. The burial mound, the Scavenger King, the explosion. I tried to sit up, but pain shot through my entire body. "Easy," the nurse said. "You've got over 30 insect bites and stings all over your body. Some kind we've never seen before. The doctors had to give you special antivenoms." "The others," I said. "Dr. Hayes, Marcus Freeman." The nurse's expression told me everything I needed to know. "I'm sorry. You were the only survivor we found." A doctor came in later and explained that I had been lucky. Another hour in the swamp and the venom would have killed me. As it was, I would need several more days in the hospital before they could release me. When the doctor left, I looked out the window of my room. Something caught my eye. A perfect circle of ants on the hospital lawn below, surrounding the building. I blinked and looked again. The ants were still there, arranged in a perfect ring like they were standing guard. That night, I woke suddenly from a nightmare about insects crawling under my skin. The hospital room was dark except for the glow of the monitors. Something felt wrong. I hit the call button for the nurse, but no one came. I noticed the temperature display on the wall. It showed the room was 76 degrees, but I was freezing. I grabbed the extra blanket from the foot of the bed, and that's when I saw it. A cockroach on the windowsill. Just one cockroach wouldn't normally bother me after all my years in the Everglades. But this one was watching me. As I moved my hand to pull up the blanket, the roach turned its body in perfect synchronization with my movement. I reached for the water glass on the bedside table. The roach moved its antenna to the right, mirroring me. I moved my hand left. The roach followed. My heart started racing, setting off the monitor's alarm. A nurse rushed in and turned on the light. The cockroach disappeared into a crack in the wall. "Are you all right, Mr. Thornton?" she asked. Checking the machines. There was a... I stopped myself. How could I explain what I had seen? Just a bad dream. The next morning, the doctor came with strange news. "Your blood work is unusual," he said, looking uncomfortable. "We found traces of an unidentified fungal compound, and your body temperature keeps fluctuating wildly." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I feared I already knew. "We're not sure. We'd like to run more tests." After he left, I pulled my hospital gown aside and examined the bites on my chest and arms. They were healing, but some of them looked strange, darker than they should be, with small, hard lumps underneath. I went to the bathroom and turned my back to the mirror, looking over my shoulder. With shaking hands, I pulled down the collar of my gown. There, along my spine, were small, hard bumps breaking through the skin. They were dark and shiny, like the shell of a beetle. I touched one and felt it move slightly under my finger. I wasn't free. The colony was inside me now. When the nurse came to check on me, I asked her for a pen and paper. I had to write everything down while I still could, while I was still myself. Someone needed to know what had happened in the Everglades, what was still happening. That afternoon, I noticed more insects around the hospital. Flies clustering on my window, ants forming lines on the floor that would scatter when anyone else entered the room. I could sense them somehow. More disturbing, I realized I could feel what they felt, a faint buzzing awareness at the edge of my mind. The doctors were puzzled by my condition. My temperature would drop when insects were near, then rise when they moved away, as if my body was synchronizing with them. Blood tests showed the fungal compound was spreading through my system, changing me from the inside. I knew I didn't have much time left. On the third night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror again. The growths along my spine had grown larger, more defined. They looked like the beginning of an exoskeleton, small plates of chitin forming under my skin. I leaned closer to the mirror, examining my face for any changes. My eyes looked normal, but as I stared at my reflection, I noticed something else. The cockroach was back, sitting on the counter beside the sink. As I turned my head to look at it, it turned too, moving in perfect unison with me. I raised my hand slowly. The cockroach raised its front leg at exactly the same time. In that moment, I understood what was happening. The Scavenger King wasn't dead. It had never been just one creature. It was the collective consciousness of the swarm. And now part of it lived in me. The fungal compound in my blood was connecting me to the hive mind, turning me into a new vessel, a new Scavenger King. I thought about going back to my bed and writing more of this down, but instead I found myself walking to the window. Without knowing why, I placed my hand against the glass. Outside, insects gathered on the ledge. Ants, beetles, flies, mosquitoes, all perfectly still, waiting. I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The voice that had been trying to get into my mind was inside now, and it didn't seem so alien anymore. I could feel the colony, not just the insects around the hospital, but far beyond, stretching back to the Everglades. They were rebuilding already, adapting, preparing. The fire had destroyed the old hive, but the colony would survive. It always survived. I looked back at my reflection one last time. My eyes had changed now, darker, with a strange iridescent quality catching the light. As I watched, a small black beetle crawled from the corner of my mouth and up my cheek. I didn't brush it away. "We adapt," I whispered, my voice carrying the faint buzz of wings. "We survive." Outside my window, the insects began to move in perfect circles, dancing to a rhythm only we could hear. The Scavenger King lived on, and I was becoming its new vessel. My name is Jack Thornton. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for almost 12 years now. Before that, I was in Vietnam. I don't talk about those days much. The nightmares do plenty of talking for me. But out here in the wilderness, things are different. The towering trees, the clean air, the silence. It helps keep the bad memories away. most days anyway. This morning started like any other. The sun was just coming up, painting the forest in soft golden light. Mist hung between the ancient cedar trees as I began my morning patrol. I breathed in the fresh pine scent and felt that familiar sense of peace wash over me. Then my radio crackled to life. "Jack, you there? Over?" It was Linda from the ranger station. "I'm here. What's up? Over. We've got a situation. 3 hikers reported missing near Enchanted Valley, last seen 2 days ago. Search and rescue is mobilizing, but you're closest. Can you head that way?" Over. My stomach tightened. Enchanted Valley was beautiful, but dangerous if you didn't know. "What you were doing on my way. Send me their last known coordinates." Over. I adjusted my pack and set off deeper into the forest. The birds were singing their morning songs, and sunlight filtered through the leaves. Everything seemed normal, but something felt off. About 2 hours into my hike, the forest changed. The birdsong stopped, just stopped. Not gradually, like when a hawk flies overhead. 1 second, chirping and calling. The next, nothing but the sound of my own breathing and footsteps on the soft ground. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I've spent enough time in these woods to know when something isn't right, and this was definitely not right. I kept walking, my hand resting on my sidearm. Not that it would help much against a bear or cougar, but old habits from Nam die hard. That's when I found the campsite. A blue tent was set up near a small clearing. A portable stove sat on a flat rock, a half-cooked breakfast still in the pan. 3 backpacks leaned against a fallen log, but no people, no blood either. No signs of struggle, just emptiness. I called out, "Hello? Park Ranger, anyone here?" My voice echoed through the trees, but no answer came back. I searched the area and found something strange. Footprints. Not hiking boots. Not animal tracks. Something else. Long, narrow impressions in the soft dirt, spaced far apart, like whatever made them had an unnaturally long stride. The prints led away from the campsite, heading toward a small stream about 50 yards away. I followed them, carefully taking photos with my camera. The trail ended abruptly at the edge of the water, like whatever made them had simply vanished. While checking the area, I noticed something half hidden under a bush, a digital camera. I picked it up, turned it on, and scrolled through the photos. Just typical vacation shots, smiling hikers posing against beautiful landscapes, sunset over the mountains, a deer spotted through the trees. Then I saw it, in the background of several photos, barely visible between the trees, a tall, thin figure, blurry and grey, like a smudge on the lens, except it moved between pictures, getting closer each time. In the last photo, it stood just yards behind. The smiling hikers, its face a pale blank oval. A sudden cold wind whipped through the trees, making me shiver. It was July, middle of summer, but suddenly it felt like November. The unnatural silence pressed in around me, heavy and watchful. Tried the radio again. "Base, this is Thornton. I found the campsite at coordinates 4751, 123.65. No sign of the hikers, but their gear is still here. Request backup. Over." Static crackled back at me. Then, faintly, "Repeat. Can't hear. Breaking up." The light was fading fast. Too fast for this time of day. I checked my watch. Only 4:30 p.m. It shouldn't be getting dark yet. Something was very wrong here. As darkness gathered between the trees, I set up a small camp near the abandoned site and built a fire. I kept my flashlight and sidearm close. That's when I heard it. A voice, soft and familiar, coming from just beyond the reach of my firelight. "Jack! Hey Jack, buddy, you out there?" I froze. That voice, I knew it instantly. Mike Kendrick, my best friend in Nam, the one who died in my arms during the Tet Offensive. "Come on, Jack. I need your help. I'm hurt bad." My training screamed at me not to move, not to follow voices in the dark. 20 years as a ranger taught me that much. But this was Mike's voice. every inflection, that slight southern drawl he could never shake. "Please, Jack, I'm dying out here." I grabbed my flashlight, my feet moving before my brain could stop them. The voice was so real, so him. "Mike?" I called, stepping beyond the safety of my fire. "Mike, where are you?" The voice led me deeper into the darkness, between ancient trees that seemed to watch my passing. Part of me knew this couldn't be real. Mike was dead. I'd watched him die, held him as he bled out, but I followed anyway, drawn by that voice from my past, calling me deeper into the shadows of Olympic National Park, where something waited that shouldn't exist. I shouldn't have followed that voice. After walking for what felt like 20 minutes, I reached a ravine hidden between two rocky hills. My flashlight beam caught something reflecting in the darkness below. I carefully made my way down the steep slope, my boots sliding on loose rocks. What I found made my blood run cold. Torn backpacks, clothing scattered across the ground, and dark stains that looked too much like blood soaking into the earth. But no bodies, no sign of the missing hikers themselves. I took photos and collected what evidence I could. That's when my radio suddenly came to life, startling me so badly I nearly fell. Through bursts of static I heard voices. "Help us! It's following! Can't see." Voice sounds like Sarah, but she's not. "Please, someone." They sounded terrified, and they sounded like the descriptions of the missing hikers. I tried responding, but only got static back. I spent an uncomfortable night with my back against a tree, jumping at every snapping twig. I didn't hear Mike's voice again, but sometimes I thought I heard breathing just at the edge of my campsite. Morning couldn't come fast enough. The sun was barely up when I heard real voices, human voices, calling my name. Relief washed over me as I spotted 3 figures making their way through the trees. Ranger Thornton, a woman with short grey hair and hiking clothes, approached with her hand extended. "I'm Dr. Lydia Hoffman, biologist with the University Research Team. The Park Service called us when they couldn't reach you last night." She introduced her companions. Marcus Weber, a local guide with deep tan skin and a no-nonsense expression, and Officer Pete Danvers, a young policeman with a nervous look in his eyes. "First time in the deep woods?" I asked him. He nodded. "City boy. Never been this far from a coffee shop." I showed them what I'd found. The campsite, the strange footprints, the ravine with the torn belongings. Dr. Hoffman examined the footprints with interest. "These are unusual, not human, not animal either. At least not any animal native to this region," Marcus scoffed. "Probably just some weird boot print. Hikers wear all kinds of fancy gear these days." I didn't mention the voice I'd heard. They already looked at me like I was the crazy old ranger. Vietnam vet with PTSD hearing things in the woods. I've heard those whispers before. We set up a proper camp near the abandoned site and planned our search for the next day. As darkness fell, we gathered around a campfire, the flames casting long shadows into the surrounding forest. "You've been quiet," Dr. Hoffman said to me. 20 years in these woods. Ever seen anything like this before?" I poked at the fire with a stick. "Not exactly, but there are stories." "Stories?" Officer Danvers leaned forward. "The local tribes have legends about these woods, about a thing they call the Thief of Voices, a creature that can sound like anyone it's heard before." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Great. Ghost stories around the campfire. The Quinault believe it hunts by mimicking voices," I continued, "lures people away from safety one by one." "That's just superstition," Marcus said, but I noticed him glancing nervously at the darkness beyond our fire. "What do you think happened to the hikers, Ranger?" Dr. Hoffman asked. Before I could answer, we all froze. From somewhere in the darkness came whispers, so faint I could barely make them out. Words that made no sense in voices that changed. Mid-sentence, Marcus jumped to his feet. "What the hell was that?" "Probably just the wind," Dr. Hoffman said, but she didn't sound convinced. Nobody slept well that night. The next morning we found something new. Strange markings carved into the trunks of several trees around our camp, symbols I'd never seen before. They looked fresh. Dr. Hoffman traced one with her finger. These looked like pictographs I've studied from ancient sites. But these are new. Didn't hear anyone approach in the night, I said. And these trees surround our camp. We were all thinking the same thing. Someone or something had circled our camp while we slept, carving these symbols. As we examined the markings, a soft sound floated through the trees. A woman's voice, singing softly, a lullaby I recognized instantly. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." My mother's voice. My mother, who died 15 years ago, singing the song she used to sing to me as a child. The others didn't react. And couldn't hear it. This voice was just for me. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I turned away from the group, pretending to check something in my pack while the lullaby continued, getting fainter as if moving away. "Let's split up," I suggested. My voice shakier than I wanted. "Cover more ground." Bad idea. I know that now. We'd been searching for about 2 hours when Marcus's voice came through the radio, high and panicked. "I found someone, one of the hikers, alive." We rushed to his location and found him kneeling beside a young man in torn hiking clothes. The hiker was breathing but staring blankly into space. When Marcus tried to give him water, it just dribbled down his chin. Dr. Hoffman examined him. "He's in shock, but physically seems unharmed." She gently tilted his head, examining his neck. "Except, look at this." We gathered around. There was a thin, precise cut on the side of the man's throat. Not deep enough to be life-threatening, but deliberate. When we tried to get him to speak, he couldn't. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Dr. Hoffman checked his throat again. His vocal cords appear to be atrophied, like they haven't been used in years. But that's not physically possible in just 2 days. Back at camp, she shared a disturbing theory. "I think that creature, the Echo Walker from your legends, it's real, and I think it's collecting voices." "That's crazy," Marcus said, but he couldn't look at the mute hiker we'd tied to a tree for his own safety. The legends, the cut on his throat, his missing voice. "It fits," Dr. Hoffman continued, "and I think it's targeting specific people." "Why do you say that?" Officer Danvers asked. She looked straight at me. "Because it seems particularly interested in Ranger Thornton. And if the legends are right, it's drawn to emotional trauma. I didn't tell them about hearing my dead friend's voice, or my mother's lullaby, but somehow Dr. Hoffman knew. That afternoon, we set up audio equipment Dr. Hoffman had brought, sensitive microphones connected to a laptop. What we recorded chilled us to the bone. Voices, dozens of them, some whispering, some crying, some calling. Names, but no source we could find. And among them, voices speaking phrases and using words from times long past. Voices of people who had disappeared in these woods decades ago. "It's building a collection," Dr. Hoffman whispered, her face pale in the fading light, "feeding off our reactions, our emotions." "We need to leave," Marcus said firmly, "now." But darkness was falling fast, too fast, unnaturally fast, and in the growing shadows, something waited, wearing the voices of the dead like a mask. We huddled in our camp as the strange darkness settled around us. None of us wanted to admit how scared we were. The mute hiker had finally fallen asleep, though his eyes kept moving under his eyelids like he was having terrible dreams. "I'll take first watch," Officer Danvers offered, checking his gun for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. I should have said no. I should have stayed awake myself. Around midnight, I woke to Dr. Hoffman shaking my shoulder. "Danvers is gone," she whispered, her face pale in the dim glow of our dying fire. I sat up quickly. "What do you mean, gone? He was on watch." I woke, up to use the bathroom, and he wasn't here. His gear is still by the fire, but he's gone. We woke Marcus, and the 3 of us called for Danvers. No answer. Then we heard it, my voice, coming from the forest. "Help, over here, I found something." It was my voice, exactly how I sound. But I was standing right there with them. "That's not me," I said quickly. "Don't listen to it." Marcus grabbed his flashlight. "But what if Danvers followed it, thinking it was you?" Before we could stop him, Officer Danvers stumbled out of the darkness into our camp. His face was scratched from branches, his eyes wide with fear. "I heard you calling for help," he gasped, looking at me. "But when I got there, no one was there. Then I heard the same call from another direction. We got him back to the fire. He was shaking so badly he could barely hold his cup of coffee. "We need a plan," Dr. Hoffman said. "This thing is toying with us." She was right. So we came up with an idea. We'd use the audio equipment to record our own voices, then play them from different locations, like bait in a trap. If it's drawn to our voices, maybe we can lure it instead of it luring us, I explained. In the morning, we set up the equipment. The silent hiker watched us with empty eyes. While testing the gear, I saw it, just for a second, between two distant trees. A tall, thin shape, too tall to be human. Its skin was pale, almost see-through like tissue paper, and its throat seemed to glow from inside, pulsing with light. It vanished before I could point it out to the others. But I knew what I'd seen. Later, Dr. Hoffman showed me something she'd found in her research notes. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a page. "Old field notes from a researcher who disappeared in these woods in 1932. He writes about a creature that doesn't just mimic voices, it feeds on them. Not just the physical voice, but the emotions behind the words. That's why it went after me first, I realized. My time in Vietnam." She nodded grimly. "Trauma, grief, pain. Those emotions make the voice more nutritious to it. A scream cut through the air, Marcus's scream. We ran toward the sound, but found nothing, no sign of him. For hours, we searched. As the day grew darker, we finally found him. My stomach still turns thinking about it. Marcus hung from a low branch, his eyes open and staring. There was a clean, surgical cut across his throat. The skin gaped open, showing an empty space where his voice box should have been. Dr. Hoffman turned away and threw up. Officer Danvers just stared, his face blank with shock. We cut him down and covered him with a tarp, too afraid to leave the camp to bury him properly. That's when we heard it. Marcus's voice coming from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come here. No one should come here," his voice, but wrong somehow, like someone wearing an ill-fitting mask. "It's using him already," Dr. Hoffman whispered. "You're next," Marcus's voice called, then laughed. A sound I know the real Marcus never made in life. "Your pain is so delicious." Officer Danvers fired his gun into the darkness. The voice just laughed again, from a different direction. That night, Dr. Hoffman pulled me aside while Danvers watched the perimeter. "I've been thinking about what the creature is," she said quietly. "I think it's drawn to emotional trauma because that's what gives voices their power. The more pain in your past, the more it wants your voice. I thought about Vietnam, about all the things I never talked about. The nightmares that still woke me up 20 years later. That's why it came after me first," I said, "and why it keeps using the voices of people I've lost." A sudden fog rolled in, thick and unnatural. Within seconds, I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. "Dr. Hoffman," I called out. "No answer. Lydia, can you hear me?" Then her scream cut through the fog, a sound of pure terror that turned my blood to ice. I ran toward it, flashlight beam cutting weakly through the dense fog. The scream came again from a different direction, then again from somewhere else. It was leading me in circles. After what felt like hours, I found a small recorder hanging from a tree branch. When I touched it, Dr. Hoffman's scream played again. A trap set by the creature. The fog cleared as suddenly as it had appeared. I was completely turned around, lost in a part of the forest I didn't recognize. In the distance, I spotted a cave entrance in the side of a rocky hill. As I approached, I heard voices, many voices, whispering from inside. Some I recognized. Mike from Vietnam, my mother, Marcus. Others were strangers, probably the missing. "Hakers, look who's finally here," said a chorus of voices, all speaking together but slightly out of sync, the one with the most delicious pain. Standing at the mouth of the cave was the Echo Walker. In the moonlight, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was tall, 7 or 8 feet at least, with limbs too long for its body. Its skin was like cloudy plastic, and beneath it I could see shadows moving, pulsing. Its face had no features except a wide, lipless mouth, and its throat glowed with soft blue light that pulsed when it spoke. "We've been waiting for you, Jack," it said in my mother's voice. Then switched to Mike's. "You let us die, buddy, you just watched." The voices kept changing, one after another, each one driving a knife into my heart with memories I'd tried to bury. I was frozen, unable to run, as the Echo Walker took a step toward me, its mouth opening impossibly wide. As the Echo Walker moved closer, something clicked in my mind. A realization. The creature had used my mother's voice, Mike's voice, and now Marcus's voice. But the missing hikers. It only played recordings of their screams or calls for help. It couldn't speak in their voices the way it could with the others. "You can't mimic a voice until you've taken it," I said aloud. "That's why you haven't used the hikers' voices to talk to us. You haven't consumed their vocal cords yet." The creature paused, its glow pulsing faster. I backed away slowly. "You've been saving them for later, building your collection first." The Echo Walker hissed, a sound like radio static, and lunged at me. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush. I had no plan except to get away, to find the others if they were still alive. I had one advantage. I knew these woods. The creature was faster, but I was smarter. I doubled back toward our camp, hoping to find Officer Danvers or Dr. Hoffman. As I ran, I grabbed rocks, sticks, anything I could find. When I reached a steep slope, I started climbing, loosening rocks as I went. The Echo Walker followed, its long limbs easily navigating the rough terrain. At the top, I waited. When I saw its glowing throat coming up the slope, I pushed with all, my might on a boulder the size of a small car. It teetered, then rolled down with a thunderous crash, taking smaller rocks with it. The Echo Walker screamed, a horrible sound like a dozen people yelling at once as the rockslide hit it. Dust filled the air, and for a moment I thought I'd killed it. Then I saw a strange mist rising from beneath the pile of rocks. The mist was taking shape, reforming into the creature's tall, thin body. I didn't wait to see more. I ran back toward camp, my lungs burning. I nearly tripped over Officer Danvers. He was lying behind a fallen log, clutching his neck. Blood seeped between his fingers. "It got me," he gasped. "But something spooked it before it could finish." I helped him up. His throat had been cut, but not deeply enough to reach his vocal cords. The Echo Walker had been interrupted. "Where's Dr. Hoffman?" I asked. He shook his head. "Don't know. We got separated in the fog." We made our way back toward camp, moving as quietly as possible. Every few minutes, we'd hear voices calling, sometimes mimicking me, sometimes Danvers. As we passed a massive old cedar tree, I heard a faint whisper. "In here." I raised my gun, pointing it at the tree. "It's me, Lydia." The whisper came again. "The tree is hollow." Cautiously I approached. Sure enough, there was a narrow opening in the trunk of the ancient cedar. Inside, Dr. Hoffman was crouched, her research notes clutched to her chest. "I saw it feeding," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "It held Marcus down and opened his throat with these long fingers. Then it put its mouth over. The wound and this light came out of Marcus and into the creature. We huddled in the hollow tree, sharing what we'd learned. I told them about the rockslide and how the creature had started turning to mist. "It's not solid," Dr. Hoffman said. "Not entirely. It's like it exists partly in our world and partly somewhere else." Night fell. We were too afraid to leave our hiding place, so we stayed inside the hollow tree, taking turns, keeping watch through the narrow opening. Around midnight, the forest went completely silent. Then the voices started, dozens of them, coming from all directions at once. Men, women, children, all speaking different words from different times. Some sounded ancient, using words I didn't understand. "It's gotten stronger," Dr. Hoffman whispered. "It can project multiple voices now." "It's trying to confuse us," Danvers said, pressing harder on his wounded neck. "Make us panic." I thought back to the native legends I'd heard about the echo. "Walker, something tugged at my memory. There was a story," I said slowly, "about a brave who trapped the voice thief using its own echoes." Dr. Hoffman looked up. "Its own voice? It has a weakness to its own echoes?" "Maybe," I said. "The legend said the brave tricked the creature into a cave where its voice bounced back at it, trapping it. We had the recording equipment. If we could capture the Echo Walker's voice and play it back at it, a soft thud on the trunk of our tree made us all freeze. Long, thin fingers like pale twigs began to curl around the edge of the opening. Danvers didn't hesitate. He fired his gun at the fingers. The Echo Walker shrieked and withdrew its hand. We burst out of the tree and ran for our camp. The creature followed, moving between the trees like a shadow, always just at the edge of our flashlight beams. When we reached the camp, we grabbed the audio equipment and turned to face our hunter. The Echo Walker appeared at the edge of the clearing, taller than before, its throat glowing brighter. It spoke with Marcus's voice. "Did you think you could hide from me? I've been hunting these woods for centuries." Dr. Hoffman turned on the recorder, capturing its words. The creature laughed, a horrible sound made of many laughs layered together. "Your little machines can't hurt me." It stepped fully into the clearing, its body seeming to flicker and shift in the moonlight, one moment solid, the next almost transparent. Officer Danvers raised his gun again, but the Echo Walker moved with impossible speed. It swept one long arm at him, passing partially through his chest like a ghost. Danvers made a choking sound and collapsed. I ran to him, but it was too late. His eyes stared blankly at the night sky, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. The Echo. Walker bent over him, reaching for his throat with those long, terrible fingers. "No!" I shouted, firing my own gun at the creature. The bullets passed through it like it was made of fog, but it turned its attention to me. "You're next, Jack," it said with my mother's voice. "Your pain will feed me for years." Dr. Hoffman frantically worked with the audio equipment, connecting speakers. The Echo Walker advanced on me, its mouth opening wider than any human mouth could. Inside was not darkness, but light, a cold blue glow like the inside of its throat. "Now," I shouted to Dr. Hoffman. She hit play, and the Echo Walker's own voice, the layered, multi-toned voice it had just used, blasted from the speakers. The creature froze. Its glow flickered like a light bulb about to burn out. "It's working," Dr. Hoffman cried, but then the Echo Walker seemed to gather itself. It turned toward her, moving jerkily like a broken puppet. "More!" I yelled. "We need more of its voice!" Dr. Hoffman adjusted something on her laptop, and the sound increased, distorting as it echoed through the trees. The Echo Walker made a noise I can't describe, like tearing metal mixed with a child's cry. It backed away, its form becoming less solid. We had found its weakness. Now we just had to survive long enough to use it. "We need to get it somewhere its voice will echo more," I said, gathering up our equipment. "Somewhere the sound will bounce back stronger." Dr. Hoffman nodded, her hands shaking as she packed the speakers and laptop. "The cave, the one you found earlier." The Echo Walker had retreated into the darkness, but we could still hear it moving through the trees around us, circling our camp. It was hurt but not defeated. I remembered the way to the cave. We grabbed what we could carry, the recording gear, my gun, useless as it was, flashlights, and a bag of supplies. We left Officer Danvers' body covered with a tarp. There was no time for anything else. As we hurried through the dark forest, voices called to us from all sides. The Echo Walker was trying to confuse us, to separate us like it had before. Don't. Listen, I told Dr. Hoffman. No matter what you hear, it's not real. She nodded grimly, her face pale in the beam of my flashlight. The voices grew more desperate, more personal. My mother begging for help, Mike screaming in pain like he had in his final moments in Vietnam, Marcus calling Dr. Hoffman's name, telling her he was still alive, trapped somewhere. We kept moving, following the beam of my flashlight through the trees. Finally we saw it, the mouth of the cave, a dark opening in the side of the hill. In there, I said. The acoustics will amplify everything. As we approached, a cold wind blew from the cave mouth, carrying whispers with it. Hundreds of whispers, layered over each other like static. It knows what we're planning, Dr. Hoffman said. We entered cautiously. The cave wasn't deep, maybe 30 feet, but it widened at the back into a round chamber. My flashlight beam caught strange markings on the walls, symbols like the ones we'd found carved into the trees. This place, Dr. Hoffman whispered. I think it's some kind of ceremonial site. Look at these markings. They're warnings. I shone my light around. Warnings about the Echo Walker? She nodded. I think the native people knew about this creature. Maybe they even trapped it here once. We set up the equipment quickly. The laptop, speakers positioned to maximize the echo, microphones to capture any sound the creature made. Now we wait, I said. We didn't wait long. The temperature in the cave dropped suddenly, our breath clouding in front of our faces. The Echo Walker entered, its body seeming to fill the entire cave mouth, blocking our only exit. Its throat glowed bright blue, pulsing with stolen voices. When it spoke, it used every voice it had collected, creating a terrible chorus. This cave has always been my home, the voices said together. You've brought my food right to me. Dr. Hoffman hit a button on the laptop, and instantly the cave filled with sound. The Echo Walker's own voice, amplified and bounced back at it from every direction. The creature screamed, the glow in its throat flickering wildly. It tried to retreat, but the sound followed it, growing louder as it echoed off the cave walls. More! I shouted over the noise. Turn it up! Dr. Hoffman cranked the volume to maximum. The speakers distorted with the strain, but the effect was immediate. The Echo Walker writhed, its body becoming less solid with each passing second. The glow in its throat pulsed erratically, like a heart beating too fast. Then something incredible happened. The creature's skin began to crack, light spilling from the fissures. The cracks spread, widening, and voices began to escape. Whispers at first, then louder, clearer. The stolen voices were breaking free. The Echo Walker let out a sound that shook the entire cave. Dust and small rocks falling from the ceiling. It wasn't a scream or a roar. It was a symphony of agony. Every voice it had ever stolen crying out at once. Dr. Hoffman and I covered our ears, the sound physically painful. The laptop screen cracked from the vibrations, but the speakers kept working, kept pumping the creature's own echoes back at it. The Echo Walker's body split apart, light pouring from inside it. For a moment, the cave was brighter than day, filled with a cold blue radiance, then silence. Complete, absolute silence. When we lowered our hands from our ears, the Echo Walker was gone. In its place was a dry, shriveled husk on the cave floor, like an empty cicada shell, but human-shaped and covered in thousands of tiny mouths, all frozen open in silent screams. Dawn was breaking as we made our way back to camp. The forest felt different, lighter somehow, the birds singing again. We found the mute hiker where we'd left him, still alive, but unresponsive. Later that day, a search and rescue team finally reached us, alerted by the Park Service when we didn't check in. They found the other two hikers alive, but hidden in a strange nest of woven tree roots deep in the forest. Like the first hiker, they couldn't speak, their vocal cords surgically removed. When we tried to explain what happened, the park authorities didn't believe us. They wrote it off as a deranged human killer, despite the evidence. The strange husk we'd found in the cave was dismissed as unidentifiable animal remains. Dr. Hoffman's recordings were corrupted, the audio distorted beyond recognition. Photos I'd taken came out blurry or completely black. It was like the Echo Walker was erasing itself from our evidence. They gave me 2 weeks of mandatory leave. Stress, they said. PTSD playing up again. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard. The nightmares started about a month later. In them, I would hear voices, not just Mike's or my mother's, but all the voices the Echo Walker had collected. They would speak through me, using my mouth to form their words. I'd wake up with my throat sore, as if I'd been screaming for hours. Dr. Hoffman called me 6 months later. Her voice was tense, frightened. "Jack, have you heard the reports? Hikers near Enchanted Valley, saying they hear your voice calling for help?" My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I haven't been anywhere near Enchanted Valley. I'm stationed 200 miles away now." There was a long pause. "Jack, I think it's not over." That night I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, examining my throat. I'd been having a strange feeling lately, a warmth, a tightness when I spoke. I turned off the lights and opened my mouth wide, using a small flashlight to look inside. What I saw made me drop the flashlight with a clatter. For just a second, when I spoke, my throat had glowed with a soft blue light, the same cold radiance that had pulsed inside the Echo Walker. I picked up the phone to call Dr. Hoffman back. But when I opened my mouth to speak, the voice that came out wasn't mine. "Jack isn't here right now," said the voice. Voices from my mouth. "But we'd be happy to take a message." In the darkness of my bathroom, I smiled at my reflection. But it wasn't my smile, and those weren't my eyes looking back at me, glowing faintly blue in the shadows. The Echo Walker hadn't died in that cave. It had just found a new home. A home with a voice that people trusted, a voice that could lure new victims into the dark places of Olympic National Park, where the ancient trees keep secrets and echoes never truly fade away.